One Piece Blades of Fire Chapter 81-100. Chapter 81. The Death of Vasek. Shikai again. Vasek Rear Admiral, can you come with me? Ma Linfando, in the corridor on the 4th floor of the headquarters building, Vas and a few friends were looking at the calm sea in the distance, and they were chatting about what happened in the past few years. A fluctuating voice came over. Vasek and his friends turned their heads to look, and saw a sturdy figure who had come to them at some point. Dark red flower collar suit, marine coat with the word, Justice, written on it, and under the white marine cap is an expressionless and stern face, exuding a cold aura. Akainu Vice Admiral. Seeing the appearance of the other party, Vasek and his friends suddenly changed their expressions and hurriedly saluted. In the marine headquarters, almost everyone knows the status of the three Vice Admiral, Akainu, Kuzan and Borsellino. They are not comparable to ordinary marine Vice Admiral. They have the Logia Devil Fruit. The best candidate for the next Marine Admiral. In the face of this kind of person, their attitude will naturally be respectful. Can you come with me? Akainu ignored Vas' salute and quietly watched Vas' expression calm. Hearing this, Vasek's friends all looked at Vasek strangely, not understanding what would happen to a character like Akainu looking for Vasek. Vasek was also stunned. Although he didn't understand why Akainu was looking for him, he nodded and said, "Yes, Akainu Vice Admiral." Seeing Vasek nod, Akainu didn't say anything, just turned around and walked down the stairs. Seeing this, Vasek smiled apologetically at his friends, and then quickly followed. Along the way, Akainu didn't say a word, just kept walking out of the headquarters building and walked towards the residential area. Vasek could only follow behind Akainu, wanting to ask what Akainu was looking for, but he opened his mouth several times. Not knowing how to ask, I could only helplessly sigh and continue to follow Akainu. 10 minutes later, there were fewer and fewer Marines standing guard around, and finally no one could be seen. Only then did Vas realize that what Akainu brought him to was not an ordinary residential area, but an old town in the residential area. The so-called Old City is a residential area close to the western coast of the Marine headquarters. Due to the inconvenience of the residents' lives due to the waves crashing here from time to time, and the buildings are a bit old, there are no people living in this area now. Known as the Old Town by the people of Marin Van Do. At this time, Vask and Akainu came to the streets of the Old City, the desolate streets, the old buildings around, the breeze blew, a ball of paper rolled over the ground, and the doors and windows were creaking from nowhere. Loud sound, no one was angry. Looking at the desolate surroundings, Vasek suddenly became more and more puzzled, and finally couldn't help but ask, "Akainu Vice Admiral, may I ask you for something?" Tread. Akainu, who was walking, stopped for a moment, then slowly turned around and looked at Vask with a blank face, and said lightly, "Originally I was going to find that brat, but it seems that instead of killing him, let him, it's better for Marine to continue living, so I'll have to come back to you." Hearing this, Vask's face changed slightly, and he vaguely guessed what Akainu was going to do in his heart. His body tensed, and he frowned. "Akainu Vice Admiral, what are you trying to say? If it's something illegal, I think the Marshal has already said it was over. Justice is absolute obedience." Akainu ignored Vasek's words at all, and said to himself as if talking to himself, "Tenryubito is the descendant of the Creator. As Marine, our duty is to protect their interests from harm, and the lawless zone is only Tenryubito's. It's just a place for entertainment, but you destroyed it, caused Tenryubito's anger, and even nearly got Marine to be blamed by the government, which as a Marine, I absolutely cannot tolerate. What about the civilians? Will the safety of the civilians be abandoned?" Vasek couldn't help but said in disbelief listening to Akainu's words. It was hard for him to believe that Akainu Vice Admiral, who was in the same position as Marine, would say such a thing. Isn't Marine's accusation just to protect civilians? If you can't even do that, what's a Marine? It seems that we can't communicate at all. As I said, justice is absolute obedience. Looking at Vasek, who looked in disbelief, Akainu said with an expressionless face, since you can't understand, then you don't need to exist. To appease Tenryubito's anger, go to hell, Vasek Rear Admiral. Goo goo goo. As he said that, a large amount of grey gunpowder rose from Akainu, and at the same time, his right hand began to turn into magma. With the rise of the surrounding temperature, the air was filled with a pungent smell, and at the same time, a drop of magma dripped. At Akainu's feet, a Z sound came out. Upon seeing this, Vasker's face changed greatly. He didn't expect that Akainu would actually do something to kill his colleagues. It would be a military court. Isn't he afraid? Akainu Vice Admiral, the Marshal will never agree with you. Vasek couldn't help shouting in horror, but Akainu turned a deaf ear and waved his magma right hand directly at Vasek. K9 Gurren. Goo goo goo. The magma arm instantly turned into the shape of a dog's head, and blasted towards Vas with a rolling heat wave. Shave. Vasek was shocked, his feet moved, he disappeared in an instant, and shot into the distance. Now he can be sure that Akainu is really going to kill him, also as Marine, but to kill him as Marine, just to quell Tenryubito's anger. Vasek suddenly felt an indescribable grief and anger in his heart. As Major Zhang Yang said, the current Marine is too wrong. Obviously they did the right thing. You will be killed now, what the hell happened to such a Marine? Damn it. Vasek let out a scream of grief and indignation, and for the first time since he was sensible, a tear could not hold back from the corner of his eyes. Don't blame me, it's all about justice. Akainu's voice suddenly sounded in front of Vas, and Vas raised his head in astonishment, only to see that Akainu appeared in front of Vas. Escape route. Looking at Vas, his arm moved, the magma palm instantly grabbed Vas, who hadn't reacted yet. Sizzle. Ah. Vask's screams rang out loudly. After a minute. Thump. Vask, who was beyond recognition, was thrown to the ground, his body charred and bloody, and he couldn't tell that he was a living person a minute ago. On the side, Akainu's magma palm slowly returned to its original state, glanced at Vasek, who was dead on the ground, pressed the hat on his head expressionlessly, turned around and walked away. However, before he could go far, he suddenly felt something, frowned, turned around and looked, a figure descended from the sky. Boom. The ground cracked, countless cracks spread as the figures fell, the cloak of justice swayed with the airflow, carrying a delicate long knife, and looking at Akainu with endless killing intent. Zhang Yang. Akainu frowned and slowly said the other party's name. Why did you kill him? Zhang Yang stood up slowly, glanced at the charred human-shaped coke beside him, looked at Akainu with cold eyes, and said without any emotion in his tone. For justice. Akainu's frowning brows stretched out, and he said calmly. Justice. Zhang Yang tightened the broken water in his hand, and with a wave of his hand, the broken water immediately shot out towards the buildings beside the street. Bang! With a muffled sound, the broken water still in the scabbard went directly into the cement wall together with the scabbard. Immediately afterwards, a long knife with a handle of Dongfa Shozi appeared in Zhang Yang's hand. Flowing blade is like fire. Zhang Yang took out the flowing blade with an expressionless face, and walked slowly towards Akainu. Seeing this, Akainu's brows furrowed again, and he said indifferently, Are you sure you want to do something with me? I won't be merciful just because you are a genius favored by the Marshal. You can try. Zhang Yang's expression remained unchanged, and then the flowing blade he was holding in one hand swung like a fire, and a flat but majestic voice sounded. There are all kinds of things, all turned into ashes, and the blades are like fire. Chapter 82, The Flame Above the Magma. The sky is blue, and the clouds are not stained. As usual, today's Marinfando is still calm. On the crescent-shaped bay, the dark cannon muzzle shone with a palpitating luster in the sun, and the upright Marines stood guard and patrolled the headquarters. In the building, the officers and generals walked in and out of the corridors, some smiling, some serious. The Marine Academy and the residential area seemed to be the same as before. Everything seems normal. As usual, Seaman First Class Monka, under the leadership of the captain, started to stand guard in the bay of Marin Van Do. With the hot sun overhead, Monka looked at the endless sea in the distance, and there was a flash of longing in his eyes. He has a dream that he doesn't dare to tell anyone, and that is to one day be able to leave the Marine headquarters and go to other branches of Marine, because he understands that in a place like Marine headquarters where there are monsters everywhere, he wants to stand out. Day is really hard. For example, a student named Zhang Yang, who has been in the limelight recently, graduated early 1 year after entering the school, and obtained the rank of major. He is said to be very strong, far exceeding his peers. Compared with this kind of monster, Menka is not so good. Silly. Therefore, Menka has always had such a wish. When he finds an opportunity, he must be sent by the headquarters to other branches, and then he will show his skills and let everyone know how strong he is. While thinking about it, Menka's young face couldn't help showing a look of anticipation. But at this time, the words of several other sailors on the side caught his attention. Why is it getting hotter? Do you feel that way? Yeah, I felt it too, and suddenly it felt hotter and hotter. What a hell of a day. Seeing a few Marines wiping the sweat on their faces and complaining with dissatisfaction, Monka was stunned for a while, and then he couldn't help frowning. Indeed, he also felt hotter and hotter. Why did the temperature suddenly rise so much? Looking up at the sky with some doubts, there were also beads of sweat on Monka's face. After muttering strangely, Monka also raised his hand to wipe the sweat. It's just that when he raised his hand, boom! A huge explosion sounded suddenly, and at the same time, with the sound of the sound, Monka developed a somewhat shocking development. The surrounding temperature rose again by an unknown amount, and a rolling heat wave also spewed towards Monka from behind. Monka was suddenly startled, and quickly turned around to look. Then, his whole body froze, and he raised his head and looked in the direction of the old city with a look of horror on his face. Because of the direction of the old city at this time, a huge fire curtain rose into the sky, and the clouds in the sky began to distort as if affected. A lot of the temperature has risen, I don't know how much. This is what? Looking at the sky-high fire curtain, Monka muttered in horror. In fact, not only Monka, but other surrounding Marines, Marine Academy, residential areas, and even the generals and Kong in the headquarters building noticed the sky-high fire curtain and the air in the old city for the first time. The scorching heat, with a look of horror on his face. But after being horrified, Kong, Sengoku, Garp, Zephyr and some powerful vice admiral all rushed to the old town with a serious look. And just when Marlene Fando was in shock because of this sudden situation, the old city. Wow wow wow. The terrifying high-temperature flames continued to swell and spread out in all directions. 1 kilometer of the old city thought that all areas were completely covered by the sea of fire. The pavement paved with stones began to soften at this ultra-high temperature, and there was a faint trend of turning into magma. Almost in the blink of an eye, the entire old town was almost completely reduced to ashes. In the sea of fire, Akainu was completely elementalized and turned into a magma man. The crimson magma kept dripping onto the softened ground. The black gunpowder that rose from his body just appeared, and it was swallowed up by the surrounding flames. Akainu watched in shock. Holding a long knife in the sea of fire, Zhang Yang was surrounded by flames, and his heart was full of disbelief. What is this flame? Is the ability of the Paramesha fantasy fruit that the marshal said about. How is it possible to have such a chaotic ability? Feeling the terrifying high temperature in the surrounding sea of fire that even he was a magma man, Akainu murmured in shock. Originally, in his opinion, Zhang Yang was nothing more than a talented kid, but now, Akainu feels that he is a little. No, he underestimated Zhang Yang. In this sea of fire, he felt a kind of soul coming from palpitations. But even so, Akainu still had no intention of backing down. He never thought that he was wrong in killing Vasek. Marine is a military organization under the world government, and Tenryubido's status is above the world government. Although, as Marshal Kong said, they don't have to follow Tenryubido's orders completely, but the Tenryubito who came this time is obviously the kind of messing around. If he really asks that World Conquer has to fix this, and Marine might really be in a lot of trouble. So, even if Akainu doesn't like Tenryubito himself, but for Marine, Akainu thinks the best way is to kill Jongyang and Vosk to quell Tenryubito's anger, but Jongyang seems to be too much valued by Kong and others, so Akainu can only falling back and choosing to solve Voskji. For Akainu, he believes this is the safest way to resolve the incident. Sacrifice a Marine in exchange for Marine's stability, this is justice. So, even though Jongyang's strength now goes far beyond his opinion, Akainu remains unmoved. Gollum gollum gollum. The magma on his body was rolling, and Akainu recovered from the shock of the high-temperature flames released by Jongyang, frowned and said solemnly to Jongyang in the Sea of Fire, "Major Jongyang, are you sure you want to do it with me regardless of the consequences? You know, everything I do is in one way or another to help you, and when Voss is dead, you..." "Shut up." Jongyang looked at Akainu coldly, and glanced at Voss K, who was under his control of the flame and did not approach him. A strong murderous intent flashed in his eyes. Vivi in his hand moved, and the entire sea of flames surged instantly. "Is that your attitude?" Seeing this, Akainu's face suddenly sank, and he said coldly, "Sure enough, it is not a wise choice to keep you in Marine, although you may be punished later, but..." Gollum gollum gollum. As he said that, Akainu raised his hands, the magma kept surging, a cold light flashed in his eyes, and he quickly waved his hands out, and at the same time, his second half sentence came out. "Just please stay here forever with Vosik." Whoosh whoosh. As Akainu quickly swung his hands out, a large amount of magma came out of his hands, forming countless magma fists that shot towards Jongyang, and there were bursts of air-breaking sounds. "You can try," Jongyang said coldly. The flowing blade Ruahuo in his hand also waved in front of him, and the surrounding flames seemed to receive an order, forming a huge flame slash to blast the countless magma fists. Next moment. Boom. Countless magma fists collided with the flame slash, and a terrifying air wave spread out immediately, and the ground with a radius of 100 meters began to crack from the center, and then puff, 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 puff. As if the bubbles were pierced, all the magma fists exploded one by one under the huge flame slash, and then were swallowed up, and the huge flame slash slashed towards Akainu unabated. "How is that possible, my magma?" Seeing this scene, Akainu's pupils suddenly shrank, and then he didn't dare to hesitate, and threw himself to the side. Boom. A huge flame slash slashed across Akainu's shoulder, leaving a ditch on the ground that seemed to have been slashed by a laser, and bits of magma emerged in it. Akainu groaned and tumbled and got up on the ground. He covered the shoulder of his left hand with his right hand. He felt the stinging pain from his shoulder. He raised his head and said in shock, "Why? The magma who can even burn out the flame is right, why can your flame hurt me?" "Why?" Jongyang was cold and Isho, because Shikai's surge of spiritual pressure to the captain level spurted out from his body, the figure moved and disappeared instantly. Swish. The next moment, Jongyang appeared in front of Akainu fiercely, and the flowing blade in his hand slashed towards Akainu like a fire wrapped in flames. "It's very simple, because my flame is above your magma." Chapter 83 Torch. The power of a blade like fire. "Because my flame is above your magma." Jongyang snorted coldly, and the flowing blade Ruahuo in his hand dragged a long flame tail and slashed down at Akainu who looked shocked, without any intention of showing mercy. "Damn." Akainu suddenly came back to his senses and cursed in a low voice. He didn't have time to do anything else. He rolled to the side again in embarrassment. Bring a burst of air, and then... boom. Terrible flames spewed out from the blade, and slashed across the ground with terrifying high temperature. The sound of ZZ suddenly sounded, and the ground softened and turned red at a speed visible to the naked eye. Magma. Akainu's pupils shrank suddenly, and then his face became serious. He understood that if it continued like this, I'm afraid that he would really be in the hands of this little devil. Goo goo goo. A large amount of magma began to swell on Akainu's right foot, and the ground began to soften. Looking at Zhang Yang, who had just waved and hadn't adjusted his posture, Akainu's eyes narrowed, and his figure disappeared instantly, and then appeared directly on top of Zhang Yang's head, his right foot ruthless. Step down hard. Fire-breathing feet. Akainu shouted loudly, and the magma in his right foot spewed out instantly like a volcanic eruption. Boom. There was a loud noise, and even the ground vibrated in Vivi. A large amount of magma instantly submerged a large area of the ground including Zhang Yang. The sound of zizi and gulu-gulu continued to sound, and the high-temperature magma instantly melted the ground into a shallow pit. However, Akainu frowned. A large amount of magma appeared in his right hand again. He turned around and punched fiercely. Then, Zhang Yang's figure suddenly appeared. They collided violently. Boom. The hot air wave spread violently from between the two, and the ground cracked and shattered. Your fire is indeed strong. The fist blocked Zhang Yang's flow, and Akainu regained his composure again, looking at Zhang Yang and said coldly, however, a kid is a kid after all, and the actual gap cannot be made up by a mere devil fruit. Dark Hound. Quote. Akainu shouted loudly, and the magma suddenly erupted on the fist that blocked Zhang Yang Lu Ruo Huo, and with a boom, Zhang Yang was directly blasted out. Zhang Yang's expression was unmoved. He was in the air, he stepped on the soles of his feet in the air, and stopped after rubbing for a distance. Oh, do you still have this ability? Akainu Vivi was surprised for a moment, then Cold Isho moved his feet, and with a bang, stepped on the air and shot towards Zhang Yang. I can do this kind of thing without using devil fruits. Damn it, kid. Akainu snorted coldly, and then threw his right fist at Zhang Yang. Great Major Eruption. Boom. A large amount of magma instantly formed a huge magma fist, which slammed into Zhang Yang like a huge meteorite. Looking at this scene, Zhang Yang closed his eyes gently and murmured, Rueren Ruahuo, no matter why you refused to see me before, but this time, please lend me all your power. Vivi shook the whole sea of flames, and then seemed to feel something, opened the corner of his mouth, Vivi raised a slight arc, opened his eyes, and then boom. The overwhelming flame spewed out from the blade of the flaming blade again, wrapping Zhang Yang's whole body in the flame. Looking at the huge magma fist that had come to him, Zhang Yang showed an unprecedented confident look on his face. The spiritual pressure in the body spewed out, and the lips moved slightly. Torch. Boom. As Zhang Yang's voice fell, the flames surrounding him seemed to receive an order, like a ring, with Zhang Yang as the center, and spread out violently. In just an instant, the huge magma fist that was about to hit Zhang Yang was smashed, and then the flames remained unabated, and swept directly towards Akainu, who was shocked. No, impossible. Akainu only had time to let out an unbelievable scream, and the whole person was hit by the flames. With a bang, the flames exploded violently. Even though Akainu has maintained the elementalization, the whole person is still like being hit by a shield. From his mouth, he coughed out a mouthful of blood mixed with internal organs, and slammed into the ground in the distance. Rumble boom. A series of impact sounds sounded, and Akainu's whole body was like a super railgun launched. The whole body hit the ground several hundred meters away with a strong hurricane, and a large hole was suddenly smashed into the ground. Then, under the action of terrifying inertia, the whole person rolled directly into the distance and flew out. The ground along the way rolled up like the water surface. A large amount of dust rose into the air, and then turned into ashes in the sea of fire. Boom. Akainu flew directly out of the old city in the sea of flames, smashed the walls around Marinfando, and flew to the sea in the distance. After leaving the sea of flames, the sudden drop in temperature made Akainu unable to help but wake up from the severe pain. He opened his eyes with difficulty. When he saw that he had already flown out of Marinfando, he couldn't help being shocked and coughed out again. A mouthful of blood. No, I can't die yet. Akainu gritted his teeth and wanted to use the moon step due to the severe pain from his body, but his body didn't obey him at all. Unwilling. Looking at this scene, the sea of fire around Zhang Yang also closed in Vivi. It's over. Those without devil fruit abilities can survive falling into the sea, let alone a Kainu, who has been seriously injured, and all that awaits him is death. However, despite killing a Kainu, those who have died will never come back. He turned his head and glanced at Vasek lying in the only peaceful place in the sea of fire. Zhang Yang sighed. If it wasn't for his sudden intrusion into his life, I'm afraid this Rear Admiral would have a very good future. I'm sorry. Muttering something softly in his mouth, Zhang Yang suddenly felt something, turned his head to look in the direction of a Kainu in the distance, and immediately frowned. Because at this time, the sea surface was freezing into ice at a speed visible to the naked eye. At the same time, a figure also rose into the air, followed by a Kainu, who was about to fall into a coma. Kuzan. A flash of coldness flashed in his eyes. Zhang Yang glanced at Vasek's charred corpse, tightened the flowing blade in his hand Ruohuo, and waved it casually. The sea of fire that burned the old city was instantly retracted into the blade, without releasing Shikai. Step down. Bang. Leaving a wave of air in the air, with surging flames all over his body, Zhang Yang shot towards Akainu and Kuzan, leaving only the old town that had turned into a blackened place, recording the violent events that happened here just now. Fight. Chapter 84 Songming. Kill Akainu. The Marshal ordered everyone to take their place. Don't panic, the Marshal and the Admiral have already headed to the old city, and the matter will be resolved soon. In addition, the first formation will go to the residential area with me to appease the work, and the other formations will stay still and wait for orders. One more time, the commander of the Marshal. Marine headquarters, Ma Linfando, where used to be calm, was unusually noisy at this time. The headquarter building, the footsteps of tap-ta-ta, continued to sound, and a large number of school officials hurriedly ran through the corridors to the square in the bay, waiting for instructions from various locations. At the same time, a large group of Marines rushed to the residential area under the leadership of a Rear Admiral. However, whether it was the seamen standing still, the school officers who gave orders, or anyone else, their eyes swept to the old city from time to time, looking at the sky-high fire curtain. Their eyes were full of shock and fear. Headquarters building. In the corridor on the 4th floor, a group of nearly 10 Vice Admiral watched this scene with a flash of worry in their eyes, and looked at one of them, Vice Admiral, who looked to be in her 40s. Suru Vice Admiral, are we just here to watch? Will it be okay? A bearded Vice Admiral said with some concern. Hearing this, the female Vice Admiral named Crane glanced at him. Her face that had begun to wrinkle was filled with calmness, and said softly, "Don't worry, Marshal Kong, Zephyr, Sengoku 2 Admiral, plus Garp Vice Admiral and those 2 Admiral candidates. If these people can't solve this, it's no use for us to go, and..." Having said this, Suru Vice Admiral raised his head and glanced at the rapidly shrinking flames in the old town. Instead of continuing to say what he was about to say, he chuckled. It looks like it's all right. Meanwhile, west of the old town. Bang! Kuzan, who caught a Kainu, landed steadily on the ice from the air. Upon seeing this, Kong and the others on the coast also jumped onto the ice and ran towards Kuzan. This is... Looking at a Kainu, who had fallen into a semi-consciousness in Kuzan's arms, his whole body seemed to have been burned by fire. Whether it was Kong, Zephyr, Sengoku, Garp and Borsellino, all of them were shocked, and they were able to beat a Kainu into serious injuries. There is no shortage of people who can do it, but they can't help but be shocked that a Kainu, who is a magma man, can be burned. Is this the power of fantasy fruit? It really deserves the name of fantasy. Sengoku couldn't help but exclaimed. I didn't expect Zhang Yang to have grown to such a level. As soon as we sensed the abnormality here, we rushed over. I didn't expect that a Kainu would become like this just by being so skilled. Zephyr couldn't help but said. Oh, it's really scary, Borsellino said in a calm tone. Ha, that's of course, after all, this kid can get out of Rayleigh's hands, it's not a trivial thing to do. Garp laughed heartlessly. Garp, don't you know the importance of things in your head yet? Sengoku couldn't help but see a word hash on his forehead, glaring at Garp and said, "The crux of the question now is why did Zhang Yang do this?" "That's right." Kong also nodded, looking at Akainu, who was severely injured, and said solemnly, "Zhang Yang has always behaved normally, but this time he suddenly did something like this. We must find out the reason, but now." With that said, Kong and the others turned around with a solemn expression on their faces and looked up at the sky, looking at Zhang Yang, who had appeared at some point, and murmured, "Now, let's stop him first." Hearing this, the expressions of the others also became solemn. Seeing Akainu's injury, no one dares to underestimate Zhang Yang now. Standing in the air out of thin air, looking at Kong and the others below, Zhang Yang held the flaming blade like fire. His brows couldn't help frowning, and he said coldly, "Marshal, are you trying to stop me?" Block. Kong could speak, Garp on the side couldn't help but speak first, shouting at Zhang Yang in the sky dissatisfied, "Stinky boy, what are you trying to do? Why do you suddenly attack Akainu, if you don't give me a reasonable reason? Explain, even you and I will never forgive you. What do you want to do?" Zhang Yang looked at Akainu in Kuzan's arms, and said coldly, "Isho, I want him to die." After speaking, Zhang Yang's figure disappeared in an instant, and the next moment, he appeared directly in front of Kuzan. Rairan Ruahuo dragged his long flame tail and slashed towards Akainu in Kuzan's arms. Kuzan's face changed suddenly, and he wanted to dodge, but found that Zhang Yang's speed was too fast, and it was too late. "Hurry up and stop." Seeing that Zhang Yang dared to act so unscrupulously in front of them, Kong couldn't help but get a little angry. With a flash, he appeared between Zhang Yang and Kuzan in an instant, his palms carrying a strong haki towards Liuran if the fire shoots away. Boom! With a roar, Kong's palm blocked the flow of the blade, and the powerful air wave spread out. However, a large number of flames spewed out from the flow of the blade, and Kong's face suddenly changed. He could feel the flame in the terrifying high temperature. Without any hesitation, he quickly flashed to the side. At this time, Kuzan had already left the place with Akainu, and the flames suddenly slammed on the ice. Sizzle! A large amount of water vapor emerged, and the ice block in a large area was instantly evaporated, and even the seawater began to become a little hot. This scene immediately shocked Zephyr and the others. Zhang Yang's attack even forced Kong to give in temporarily. Kong was also horrified. The flames that Zhang Yang set out were really beyond his expectations. He had seen Akainu's magma fruit, but compared to the flames that Zhang Yang released now, it was like a heaven and earth. How could this be? Let him not be shocked. "Stinky boy, what are you thinking? How did Akainu offend you?" Looking at this scene, Garp couldn't help but look serious, staring at Zhang Yang Dao seriously. He could feel that Zhang Yang's eyes were full of killing intent, but he didn't understand that Zhang Yang and Akainu basically had nothing to do with each other, so why did he suddenly want to kill Akainu? Others also had this doubt in their minds, so when they heard Garp's words, they couldn't help but look at Zhang Yang. Seeing this, Zhang Yang glanced at the unconscious Akainu, paused, and said coldly, "He killed Vasek." What? Hearing this, almost everyone's expressions changed drastically. Vasek, Rear Admiral from Marine's headquarters, and even the people who directed the incident with Zhang Yang this time, how could they not know each other? But Akainu actually killed Vasek. What exactly is going on? "Zhang Yang, you can't talk nonsense like this," Zephyr couldn't help but said seriously. But Kong and Sengoku, they looked at each other as if they understood something. "Bullshit." Zhang Yang grinned Isho and said coldly, "Now Vosk's body is still there. If you don't believe me, you can check it out, but before that." Boom! A large amount of flames spewed out from the flowing blades again, and the frozen sea surface began to melt rapidly in an instant, and the sea water began to boil. Kong and the others were shocked and quickly retreated to the side. At the same time, Kong hurriedly said, "Zhang Yang, don't be impulsive. If what you say is true, Akainu, we will definitely give him the punishment he deserves. Stop now." Zhang Yang was unmoved, His icy eyes looked directly at Kuzan, and said indifferently, "Kuzan Vice Admiral, if you don't want to be involved, put Akainu down quickly." After finishing speaking, Zhang Yang didn't wait for Kuzan to answer. He waved the blade like fire in his hand, and the flames all over his body instantly surged out, and rushed towards Kuzan and Akainu fiercely. "Kuzan, put Akainu down!" Kong shouted in horror. Hearing this, Kuzan flashed a struggle in his eyes, then threw Akainu and ran to the side himself. Next moment. Boom! The surging flames enveloped Akainu, whirling into the sky like a tornado. Songming. Zhang Yang's lips moved slightly, and then Liuran Ruahuo waved again, and the tornado flames exploded instantly and dissipated in the air, and Akainu's figure disappeared completely. Akainu, die! Chapter 85 Remaining Reiatsu. Puff! The tornado flames exploded in the air as Zhang Yang waved the flowing blade, and Akainu's figure had completely disappeared, leaving only a little ashes blown away by the sea breeze. Quiet. Incredibly quiet. Whether it was Kong, Garp, Zephyr, Sengoku, or Borsellino and Kuzan, who had just escaped the catastrophe, they all looked at this scene in horror. There was no mercy, but after the shock was followed by Kong's unprecedented anger. Kill Akainu in his face. To completely treat his words as air, this is simply not even paying attention to him. Boom! An extremely oppressive and domineering aura spewed out from Kong's body, pressing down on Zhang Yang's body ruthlessly. Zhang Yang looked at Vivi for a moment, then looked at Kong with some surprise. "This is Conqueror Haki. It seems that my attitude towards you is so good in normal times that you don't care about me as a marshal now." Kong stared straight at Zhang Yang with a hint of anger, and a wave of air continued to spread around him like a ripple, and shouted, "In this case, no matter how talented you are, even if Akainu is indeed at fault first, but ignoring the boss's orders, we Marine don't need this kind of navy." Boom! After finishing speaking, the ice block under Kong's feet burst violently, and his whole body shot towards Zhang Yang at an unimaginable speed. So fast. Zhang Yang's pupils couldn't help shrinking. He hasn't released Shikai yet. Reiatsu and strength are solid captains. However, even with such strength, Kong's speed is still beyond Zhang Yang's expectations, and he is faster than before. Zephyr, Akainu, etc., who have passed, are all faster. I don't know how many times. If it was just Shikai's Zhang Yang, he would never back down in the face of this speed, but at this time, he has used Torch and Songming's two flaming moves. His spiritual power has been almost consumed, and he can only barely. He lifted Lu Ren Ruahuo and blocked it in front of him. The flames also began to wrap around the blade again. It seemed that the two were about to collide. Swish! Swish! Two sturdy figures suddenly appeared between Zhang Yang and Kong. Four big hands pressed firmly on Kong's shoulders. With a bang sound, a wave of air spread, but Kong's body was also affected by this. Stopped. The sudden situation made everyone stunned for a moment, and then looked at the two sturdy figures. Marine Hero Garp Vice Admiral. Marine Headquarters Admiral, Zephyr. Garp, Zephyr, what are you two doing? Kong stared at Garp and Zephyr. Kong, calm down. Garp shouted loudly, then turned his head to look at Zhang Yang, who seemed to have no change in his face. He couldn't help but squeak in anger, and cursed angrily, "You stinky boy, how long do you want to make trouble and still don't put down your weapon, don't you? Do you really want me to do it myself? Zhang Yang, don't continue, otherwise things will be really difficult to clean up." Zephyr also said with a serious face. Hearing this, Zhang Yang glanced at Garp and Zephyr and couldn't help feeling a little strange. Call. As soon as his mind moved, the flames on the flames disappeared in an instant, but Zhang Yang still did not relieve Shikai, but looked at Garp, Zephyr and Kong, and said solemnly, "Marshal, I apologize to you for ignoring your order, but I have absolutely no regrets about killing Akainu. Vasek was my only friend in Sabayati Archipelago, and he died only because I asked him to participate in the eradication of lawless zones, either as a friend or as a marine, I absolutely can't forgive Akainu. If you don't think I deserve to be marine, then I have nothing to say. Having said that, Zhang Yang paused, stared at Kong and said, I will be staying at Marine Academy for the past few days. If Marine wants to punish me, she can come to me at any time. After finishing speaking, Zhang Yang didn't wait for Kong and others to answer. He stepped on his feet, soared into the sky, and flew towards the old city. Only Kong and others, who were a little stunned, were standing on the ice block, which had not melted on the sea. Zhang Yang's words just now echoed in the middle. What an idiot. After a while, Kong couldn't help sighing. The anger on his face slowly dissipated. Looking at the direction where Zhang Yang was leaving, he said helplessly, after all, I'm still too young. Akainu is wrong, but your way of solving things, it's so impulsive. Then what do we do next? Sengoku on the side said. Hearing this, Kong sighed helplessly again, and said solemnly, go back first. This matter is no longer easy to solve. Prepare to hold a meeting and let everyone discuss what to do. Marine Academy. Due to the sudden sky-high fire curtain and temperature rise, all the students fell into shock and anxiety, but because they received the command of the marshal, all the students stayed quietly in the teaching under the orders of the instructors. In the building, nothing happened. However, not all the students are in the teaching building. For example, Ai-yin is still on the playground. What the hell happened? Looking at the fire curtain that had been extinguished in the direction of the old city, I felt that the temperature had begun to drop again, and under the big tree that was used to rest beside the playground, Ai-yin couldn't help but murmured in confusion. At the same time, a subconscious association occurred in his mind. To a person, Zhang Yang. Since Zhang Yang suddenly said that he had something to leave, the temperature began to rise, and there was a flame that could be felt terrifying even from a long distance. If this has nothing to do with Zhang Yang, why is it such a coincidence? However, is that kind of powerful, heart-pounding power really possessed by Zhang Yang? Thinking wildly in her head, suddenly, Ai-yin seemed to feel something. When she looked up, she saw Zhang Yang whizzing through the air with a black thing in his arms, flying towards the boys' dormitory. What's that black one? Ain suddenly became more puzzled. Tread. He landed directly from the sky onto the balcony of the Bastille dormitory, pushed the gate of opening into the room, put Vasquez's charred corpse on the bed, and after a few silent glances, his face suddenly turned white. The line of sight in front of him was dizzy for a while, the flowing blade in his hand disappeared in a flash, and the spiritual pressure in the body also dropped from the captain level to the deputy captain level. Is it released? Holding the edge of the bed and sitting cross-legged on the ground beside him, Zhang Yang murmured with a pale face, thank you this time, it's like fire. Turning his head to look at Vasquez's charred corpse on the bed, Zhang Yang smiled weakly. Zhang Yang is not a cold-blooded person, nor is he the kind of person who becomes arrogant when he has strength. In his eyes, there is only one criterion. If you are polite to him, he will be polite to you. If you are good to him, he will be good to you. In Sabayati Archipelago, Zhang Yang has received a lot of care from Vas, and his personality is very compatible with Vas. It can be said that he is one of Zhang Yang's few friends. He was angry, so even though he knew that there might be a lot of consequences later, Zhang Yang chose to solve Akainu without hesitation. If people do not offend me, I will not offend others, but if others offend me, I will offend others. This is the bottom line of publicity. But no matter what, Akainu has already been killed by me, so it can be considered a little compensation for you. I'm really sorry for letting you become like this. Some shook his head with a wry smile. Zhang Yang felt his body becoming weaker and weaker. After looking at Vasquez's body again, he turned his head and closed his eyes, and began to recover. I don't know why this time, Lu Ren Ruahuo responded to him for the first time and lent him his power, so Zhang Yang was able to maintain Shikai state all the time, and even used moves such as Torch and Song Ming, but correspondingly, Zhang Yang the consumption is extremely large, and now Zhang Yang, I am afraid that any ordinary pirate can easily kill him. But soon, Zhang Yang opened his eyes abruptly, and turned his head back to Vosk in disbelief. Just now, the perception that has become sharp due to training, actually felt the Reiatsu of Vosk. Although it is negligibly weak, it is indeed Vosk's Reiatsu. Chapter 86 Emergency Meeting. Snapped, snapped, snapped. Marine headquarters, Marine Fando, sounded like knocking on wood, and spread throughout the entire headquarters building. All Marines above the general level were stunned, and then they all put down their work and rushed to the conference room on the 5th floor, because they understood, this is the voice that only the Marshal is qualified to call for an emergency meeting. But, why the sudden meeting? Is it because of the fire in the old city just now? While rushing to the conference room, the generals couldn't help but speculate in their minds. 10 minutes later, in the large conference room of Marine headquarters. Is everyone here? Kong sat in the first place, glanced at the generals below and said indifferently. Hearing that, except for Zephyr and Sengoku Admiral, Garp, Borsellino, Kuzan, Crane and other Vice Admiral's expressions did not change, the other Vice Admiral and Rear Admiral looked around subconsciously, and then all eyes stopped. In Akainu's vacant position. Marshal, Akainu Vice Admiral hasn't arrived yet. A Vice Admiral looked at Kong, and couldn't help but feel a little strange. Akainu Vice Admiral has always been very punctual, why is he late this time? Others have similar thoughts. No matter what Akainu is doing, he seems to have the kind of mentality that no blemish is allowed at all. This is the first time that he did not show up for an emergency meeting like this. That's one of the things this meeting is going to tell you. Looking at the confused generals below, Kong paused and said solemnly, Akainu Vice Admiral, already dead. Quiet. Incredibly quiet. Except for those who knew the details, such as Garp, the other generals looked at Kong, who was saying this, amazing language, for a while. What? How is this possible? Akainu Vice Admiral is going to die. Marshal, are you telling the truth? What's going on? Is it because of the fire in the old town? Following Kong's voice, unbelievable exclamations came out of the generals' mouths. After all, what Kong said shocked them too much. Although Akainu Vice Admiral basically doesn't like to communicate with anyone on weekdays, they still know about Akainu's strength. Marine Rokushiki is proficient in all, Haki is also a top-notch in Vice Admiral, and he is also a Logia Magma fruit ability. Even if the strength is not comparable to Admiral, it is far more than the General Vice Admiral. His position in Marine headquarters is completely regarded as the next Marine Admiral. But it was this kind of person who suddenly said that he was dead, which made them not shocked. Quiet. Kong let out a low voice, and immediately made everyone quiet. He glanced at everyone, paused, and said, I know you all feel unbelievable, but I hope you will listen to me first before expressing your opinion. Quote. After saying that, Kong glanced at everyone again, and after seeing that they were all looking at him, he continued, Akainu Vice Admiral was killed by Major Zhang Yang. Major Zhang Yang. The generals widened their eyes in horror again, but because of Kong's order just now, they refrained from speaking, but everyone's hearts were like a stormy sea and could not calm down. If Akainu's death can be reluctantly accepted, then Zhang Yang killed Akainu, and they are really unacceptable. After all, in their opinion, the two have nothing to say, and the actual gap is also very large. However, I have probably investigated why this happened. Kong continued. Everything was caused by the illegal zone incident. Akainu Vice Admiral felt that if he didn't try to appease Tenryubito's anger, it would affect the development of Marine, so he killed Voss and Rear Admiral, and used Voss's death to appease Tenryubito, but Voss and Rear Admiral had a good relationship with Major Zhang Yang, so it turned out that now, Voss and Rear Admiral is dead and Akainu Vice Admiral is dead. Quote. Both sides are right or wrong in this matter, but now Akainu is no longer there, so this meeting is mainly aimed at the disposal of Major Zhang Yang, and everyone can express their opinions. Kong finished speaking. He quietly watched the generals below waiting for their answers. The generals looked at each other, and they all saw shock and disbelief in the eyes of the other, but they were all high-level Marine generals after all, and they quickly recovered, although it was shown by Akainu's death and publicity. The strength was shocked, but each of them still thought seriously. For a while. Marshal, I think Major Zhang Yang did the right thing. A Marine Rear Admiral stood up abruptly, his face full of anger and pain and said, Akainu. No, he is not worthy of being a Vice Admiral. In order to please Tenryubito, he even killed a colleague, this kind of thing. This kind of thing. Damn. Saying that, the Rear Admiral slammed his fist on the table with a look of grief and anger on his face. That's right, Marshal, and we also think that Major Zhang Yang did nothing wrong. A few Rear Admirals on the side were also full of sadness and anger, because they were Vosk's friends, and suddenly learned that their friends were killed by Akainu Vice Admiral. How can you make them not sad? How not to get angry? Akainu Vice Admiral's approach is indeed a little inappropriate, but Major Zhang Yang's approach is also wrong. A Vice Admiral glanced at them and said, the Major is the Major, and if Vice Admiral did something wrong, a court-martial will naturally deal with it. No matter what the reason is, he killed Vice Admiral as a Major. If it spreads out, then Marine will still be able to deal with it. What kind of discipline is there? Several Rear Admirals suddenly stared at the Vice Admiral, wanting to say something, but didn't know how to refute it. Okay. Kong Zhou frowned, then looked at Suru Vice Admiral and Sengoku, and said, Suru Vice Admiral, Sengoku Admiral, what do you think? Suru Vice Admiral smiled lightly and said, Zhang Yang's actions are indeed outrageous, but it is reasonable. After all, I heard that Vosik Rear Admiral has a good relationship with him. His friend was killed, what did he do? Nothing is surprising. However, although Akainu Vice Admiral is also at fault, sin does not lead to death, isn't it? Sengoku glanced at he and said, but since Akainu Vice Admiral has passed away, it is useless to say that, the key is the disposal of Major Zhang Yang now. Sengoku glanced at Kong, paused, and continued, as the candidate for the next Admiral Akainu, losing him is indeed a big loss for us, but now it seems that although Major Zhang Yang is still young, he is fully capable as the next Marine Admiral, so I think that Major Zhang Yang is wrong, but his starting point is good, and if he loses Major Zhang Yang again, Marine may not be able to bear the loss, so I'm in favor of Major Zhang Yang. Sengoku glanced at Garp, who had a gloomy face, and chuckled. Hearing this, Garp was stunned for a while, looked at Sengoku a few times, and then laughed out loud. That's right, this kid is a little impulsive, but he still thinks about Marine, and I agree with him. Quote. I agree too. Suru Vice Admiral chuckled. Seeing this, the others glanced at each other and expressed their opinions. Me too. I agree with. I don't agree with. Agree. Disagree. Different voices sounded one after another. Some people agreed, and naturally some people disagreed. However, it seems that because of Sengoku's words, most people still chose to agree with Zhang Yang. Among them, for some reason, even Kuzan and Borsellino chose to agree. Looking at this scene, Kong nodded without being emotionally fluctuated, and said, in this case, let's move on to the next question. Regarding the whereabouts of Major Zhang Yang. Chapter 87 Goal, New World. The wind is high and the clouds are clear, the sky is clear and the air is clear. Today is another good weather. Before you know it, a week has passed since the fire curtain event in the old city. However, even though it has been a week, everyone in Marinvando still has a deep memory of what happened that day. Not only because of the scorching heat that day was like being in a furnace, but what made them unforgettable was something that the marshal personally announced in public. Akainu Vice Admiral sentenced to death for killing Marine colleagues. Akainu Vice Admiral. Logia Devil Fruit Magma Fruit Ability. Marine Headquarters Vice Admiral. A strong candidate for the next Marine Admiral. This kind of person actually died, and was executed by Marine for killing a colleague. While shocking countless Marines, it also made countless Marines regret and spurn him. If even his own colleague can be killed, no matter how strong the Marine is, no matter how great it is, it will not be recognized by anyone. Therefore, in the next week, the entire Marinfando was discussing this matter everywhere, but what they said were not good words. It's just that not all they learned about the real facts, but only a small number of people knew about it. For example, Marine's executives, for example, Zhang Yang. Walking in the old city on the way back to Marine Academy, listening to the words, Marine scum Akainu, from several sailors who passed by, Zhang Yang showed an indescribable strange expression on his face. In order to reduce the impact, Zhang Yang muttered, then shook his head and ignored it. Although it is said that he killed Akainu himself, it is an indisputable fact that Akainu killed Vosk, and it is natural for him to be spurned by others, and Zhang Yang has no guilt. The way is different, the justice itself is contrary to the Marine that Zhang Yang wants. Even if Zhang Yang did not kill Akainu now, the two are destined to become hostile in the future, and the result is still the same as now. While thinking about it, Zhang Yang turned his head and glanced in the direction of the old city, and couldn't help but let out a bitter smile. The reason why he came from the direction of the old city was because he wanted to see if the water cutoff was still there, but obviously, under the 6,000-degree high-temperature flame, and Zhang Yang was not able to control it because of his anger at the time the flame, even the broken water, which is a large knife, was completely burned to ashes. After looking for Zhang Yang for a long time, I could not find anything. It took a while for the water to stop, and now it is suddenly gone. Zhang Yang really feels a little weird. Speaking of which, it's been a week, and I'm almost ready to leave. Looking up at the sea in the distance again, Zhang Yang seemed to remember something and whispered to himself. 6 days ago, Zephyr found Zhang Yang who was still in the student's dormitory. In addition to telling him the result of Marine's treatment of him, he also told him his whereabouts, the second half of the Great Waterway, the terrifying sea area called New World. When he heard the news, Zhang Yang was also quite surprised at the time. He could guess that Marine would not give him any punishment. After all, what he did was not wrong from a normal point of view, but he was thrown into the New World. That made him a little surprised, and at the same time, it also made him very excited. The New World is not comparable to the first half of the Great Waterway. The future 4 emperors, even some Shichibukai, and various other powerful pirates are basically staying in the New World, plus various dangerous environments. Even the Marine headquarters did not dare to easily set foot in that sea area. However, for Zhang Yang, that is the sea area he most wants to go to now. As I said before, Zhang Yang doesn't have much ambition. Although he now wants to subvert the entire Marine and make it change, it is only for his own comfort. Zhang Yang's real desire is to fight against those super strong. It's not in vain to travel through it once. In the past, he had no strength. Now, if Zhang Yang's strength is used in the upper class, even Admiral must be careful to deal with it. It is definitely enough for him to show his skills in the New World. Therefore, Zhang Yang is still looking forward to the next trip to the New World. However, old rules, say goodbye to them before leaving. Thinking to himself, Zhang Yang gently issued, and after 10 minutes, he returned to the Marine Academy door, pushed it casually, the heavy door was pushed open, and then closed it with a backhand, and walked towards the playground. At this time, on the playground, a girl with short sapphire blue hair who looked about 14 years old was constantly practicing the slashing action of double knives. Every time she waved her hands, a sharp airflow would blow the sand on the ground. Dust. She is Ai Yin, who has been learning swordsmanship with Zhang Yang these past few days. When Zhang Yang pushed open the door and entered, Ai Yin frowned, then stopped what she was doing and looked over, but when she saw Zhang Yang, a smile appeared on her face. "How's your practice going?" Zhang Yang walked over and smiled. "Well, it's effective, the power of swinging the knife is obviously stronger than before," Ai Yin said happily, looking at Zhang Yang's eyes full of brilliance. Now, she is really convinced by Zhang Yang. She has been using the method taught by Zhang Yang to swing the knife in the past few days. She really feels that the power of each knife has increased, and it is still steadily improving. "Well, that's good. Keep practicing." For a few months at most, your strength will definitely increase a lot. Zhang Yang nodded, then as if he remembered something, he took out a station book from his pocket and handed it to Ai Yin, said, "This is some swordsmanship experience I wrote, take a look when you have time, it should be of great help to you." "Thank you." Ain immediately took it over happily, but then reacted, looking up at Zhang Yang and said uncertainly, "Are you leaving?" "Well, the marshal gave me the order a week ago." Zhang Yang nodded, looked up at the 5th floor of the teaching building, and continued, "You practice first, I'll say goodbye to them." After finishing speaking, Zhang Yang walked directly into the teaching building without waiting for Ai Yin to answer. Ai Yin was stunned for a while, then glanced at the small book in his hand, an inexplicable look flashed in his eyes, and continued to practice swordsmanship. On the 5th floor of the teaching building, it was a little different from usual. Today, all the academies are sitting on the ground, and Zephyr is explaining to them the knowledge of military command, that is, military teaching. Seeing Zhang Yang walking in, Zephyr seemed to know what Zhang Yang was going to do, so he stopped lecturing and nodded to Zhang Yang. Zhang Yang also smiled apologetically, and then walked to the front of the students. Zhang Yang. Seeing Zhang Yang coming over suddenly, Bastille and the others couldn't help but be stunned. Seeing the surprised eyes of Bastille and others, Zhang Yang paused and said with a chuckle, "I'm sorry everyone, I'm here to say goodbye." "Goodbye." Bastille and others were stunned for a while, and then reacted. "Are you leaving again?" Tina said in a depressed mood. Zhang Yang nodded and said with a chuckle, "I have been very happy to get along with everyone during this time. I am afraid that I will not be able to meet until after graduation. I am looking forward to seeing you in the sea at that time." "Ha. If you want, we won't get it for you." "That's right, it's beautiful to think about. See you next time, Zhang Yang." When I asked Wenyan, the students couldn't help laughing, and there was no loss of goodbye for the first time before. "See you next time then." Zhang Yang also smiled, then nodded at Bastille and Tina, turned around and took the elevator downstairs. "Don't worry, Zhang Yang, I will definitely handle what you explained," Bastille murmured while looking at the closed elevator door. A few hours later, standing on the bow of a medium-sized warship, Zhang Yang looked at the sea in the distance, with an expectant smile on his face. Goal, New World. Chapter 88 Ghost Taoist Cultivation Program. The sky is clear, the strong sunlight shines directly on the sparkling sea, the sea breeze blows, setting off colorful waves. Under the white clouds, above the blue sea, an imposing warship comes slowly by the wind, the green hull shone dazzlingly. On the deck, the sailors stood straight and tidy. Occasionally, a few whispers came from their mouths, and the cool sea breeze blew, and the sails swished along with them. In the cabin, in a very delicately decorated room, Zhang Yang sat cross-legged on the bed, his eyes closed, a long knife with a hilt of dongfa shozi was placed on his legs, and the cool sea breeze blew on his body from the window. Let his short black hair and justice coat keep swinging, but it did not affect him in the slightest. Because of the publicity at this time, his mind has completely entered his inner world. As before, there was still a thick fog in all directions, and Zhang Yang stood in it out of thin air, but the difference this time was that there were no endless flames rushing towards him. And now, Zhang Yang was shouting and shouting non-stop at this time. "It's like fire, can you come out and meet me? Didn't you agree to lend me your power when you fought Akainu last time? Why don't you come out to see me now? Please come out. I have something to ask you. The blade is like fire, I see you, come out." He kept shouting like an idiot, but until Zhang Yang was out of breath, there was still no sound to respond. Your sisters, haven't come out yet." While panting, Zhang Yang couldn't help scolding in a low voice, and at the same time he couldn't help but feel a little depressed in his heart. Captain, do you think you can't be more appropriate when you are old? What's the point of throwing this arrogant sword spirit here? At least tell him that I am his master now." Some helpless sighs, Zhang Yang waved his hand and said, "It's okay, if you don't want to see me, Forget it, I'm leaving. After speaking, Zhang Yang's figure flashed and disappeared directly into this space. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Swish. Haha, I see you. Zhang Yang's figure appeared here in an instant, looking around excitedly and shouting, but when he found that there was still nothing around, he couldn't help but pat his forehead. I'm such an idiot. Feeling a little speechless about his behavior, Zhang Yang sighed helplessly, glanced around again, and withdrew from his inner world. And just when Zhang Yang exited his inner space, a rickety figure appeared here. Looking at the place where Zhang Yang disappeared, he didn't know what to think, and sighed. What a fool, I still don't understand this old man. Painful. What kind of painstaking efforts? Also, it's not okay to call me a fool as a sword spirit. A somewhat playful voice suddenly came from behind the rickety figure. The rickety figure paused, then snorted coldly, turned around, and waved at the same time. Boom. The overwhelming flames poured into Zhang Yang. You. Zhang Yang looked at the somewhat familiar face of the rickety figure in a daze. His eyes flashed with surprise. He wanted to say something, but he was instantly burned to ashes by the endless flames. Slick boy. The hunched figure snorted in dissatisfaction, and then disappeared into the inner space as well. Swish. In the room, Zhang Yang opened his eyes fiercely. The endless heat he felt in his inner world and the coolness brought by the sea breeze immediately gave him a feeling of 2 layers of ice and flowers, and he couldn't help shivering, subconsciously. Shrinking his neck, he picked up the Ruo Ren Ruahuo on his leg, remembering the familiar face he saw just now, and an inexplicable smile appeared on his face. I didn't expect it to be like you. He sighed, and then Zhang Yang couldn't help but muttered doubtfully, but what is the painstaking effort he's talking about? Is it still good for me not to let me fully grasp Shikai? Isn't this a fool? After muttering silently for a while, Zhang Yang knew that Dao Zhen was out of play this time, and stood up. Instead of withdrawing Lu Ren Ruohuo into the sea of consciousness, he inserted the scabbard and put it on the bed. After all, he has no water to use now. You can only carry the flow blade with you. But this is also good, you can play all your strengths anytime, anywhere. After exercising his slightly sore body, Zhang Yang walked to the window. The cool wind was blowing on his face. Looking at the endless sea and the blue sky outside, he couldn't help taking a deep breath, and said softly, the weather is good. Yeah, over the years, I have gone through a lot of spring, summer, autumn and winter, and I have seen too many big and small things. Now I understand that only when I face it calmly can I see hope in front of me, and people's life is like now. The weather is the same, it looks very beautiful, but I don't know when it will be cloudy and I can't see ahead. Quote. A sighing voice suddenly sounded behind Zhang Yang. Zhang Yang's expression suddenly became a little weird. He turned around and looked at the figure sitting at the table looking at the pastry in a daze. Zhang Yang couldn't help laughing and said, Voss, Rear Admiral, what? It changes after dying once. So swish. It's not like you. Stop calling me Vossic Rear Admiral, I'm not Marine anymore. The figure shook his head in disappointment, raised his head, and a face with some vicissitudes was revealed in the sun. This person is Vossic Rear Admiral who should have been killed by a Kainu. Hearing Vosk's words, Zhang Yang raised his eyebrows, smiled and shook his head, disappointed with Marine like that. Maybe. Vossic clenched his fists in disappointment and smiled bitterly. With my current strength, what if I'm not a Marine? I'm just an ordinary person. Hearing this, Zhang Yang smiled, picked up a piece of pastry on the table, took a bite and said, didn't I say it? As long as you have the desire to eat, I can make you have the power that used to be countless times stronger. Don't worry, just wait. But it's been 7 days, and I still don't feel hungry. Vosk looked at the pastries on the table and smiled wryly. So don't worry, the results will be available within a few months at most. Zhang Yang said with a confident look, and ate the cake in his hand in one bite. Hope it. Vosk shook his head and stared at the pastries on the table again, stunned. Seeing this, Zhang Yang shrugged and walked to the window to blow the wind. As for why Vasek is here, then it started when Zhang Yang discovered that Vasek still had Reiatsu 7 days ago. As we all know, human beings are divided into two parts, the soul and the body. If the soul is compared to the trunk of a tree, then the body is the branch, and you can see which is more important. Vasek's body is undoubtedly dead, but since he can feel Vasek's Reiatsu, it means that his soul has not dissipated, and after a public inspection, it is determined that Vasek's soul has indeed not dissipated. So whether it was out of love or something else, Zhang Yang used the ghost path dedicated to healing to save Vasek's weak soul, which is why this scene appeared. Although Vas is just an ordinary soul without any spiritual power, but since there is no chain of cause and effect, at least it won't become a void. As for Zhang Yang's desire to eat, that is naturally whether there is the potential to cultivate spiritual power. With thousands of years of experience as the captain, Zhang Yang could see at a glance that Vas had the potential to cultivate spiritual power, so he kept Vas staring at the cakes, saying that when he felt hungry, he would become stronger. Although it is impossible for Vasek to have a Zanpakudo because there is no shallow attack, it is still possible to practice ghost Taoism and become a ghost Taoist. Even Zhang Yang is pondering whether he should go out to collect souls in the future, and then come to ghost Taoism. The public training plan has cultivated a group of ghostly strongmen for myself. Chapter 89-9 Snake Pirates. Dong dong dong. Dong dong dong. Report to Major Zhang Yang that a pirate ship was found in the southwest of the warship, please instruct actions. In the room, Zhang Yang was casually leaning against the window, blowing the sea breeze, and the sound of knocking on the door came in along with the report of the Marines. Vas, who was staring at the cake in a daze, couldn't help but subconsciously stood up and was about to give an order. But then I remembered that I was just a dead man, sighed, and sat back helplessly. Seeing this, Zhang Yang couldn't help but smile and comforted. Don't worry, except for people with particularly strong souls, ordinary people can't see you, so you don't have to stay in the room all day. You know so much, is turning me into a soul the power of fantasy fruit? Vas asked looking up. Zhang Yang shrugged, nodded undeniably, picked up the blade, and then pushed the door and walked out. Go out for a walk or stay in the room as you like, and tell me when you feel hungry. Quote. Bang. After finishing speaking, the door was also closed, and Vas was the only one left in the room. He picked up a piece of cake on the table, a strange look flashed in his eyes, looked at the cake in his hand and murmured, if you feel hungry, can I regain my power? What a strange way. On the other side, Zhang Yang had already come to the deck, and the sea breeze was blowing on his face, causing Zhang Yang's short black hair and justice coat to swing wildly. At this time, the sailors were standing straight and neat. Where is the pirate ship? Zhang Yang said to the sea soldier who just reported the letter. Major, over there. Sailor pointed to the southwest road. Zhang Yang looked in the direction pointed by the sea soldiers, and a pirate ship with a strange shape suddenly appeared in his eyes. As for why it's weird. First of all, the structure of this ship is very generous. On the whole, both the sails and the cabin are all red, and other parts are completely black or red and black. At first glance, people can't help but see the coffin. In terms of visual perception, and secondly, what caught the attention of Zhang Yang and the sailors the most, this ship seemed to be driven by two giant sea snakes on their backs. This ship looks familiar. Looking at this somewhat weird pirate ship, Zhang Yang couldn't help touching his chin and muttering. He seemed to think of something, but he couldn't remember it. This feeling drove Zhang Yang very crazy. Major Zhang Yang, please give an order. The sea soldier on the side couldn't help reminding Zhang Yang when he saw that there was no reaction. Wait, don't be noisy, I'll think about it soon. Zhang Yang frantically waved his hand to tell the sea soldiers to stop talking, frowning and thinking hard. Which pirate group is that? Such a familiar feeling must have appeared in the original book. But why is Mao just unable to remember? Marine on the side suddenly closed her mouth with a depressed look on her face. The character of Major Yang seems to be a little weird. The sea soldier muttered to himself, but Zhang Yang finally remembered something. It turned out to be them. Zhang Yang's frowning brows stretched out, and an inexplicable smile appeared on his face, because he finally knew the identity of this pirate ship. The 9 snake pirates, from the legendary Amazon Lily, a country full of women, are led by one of the Shichibukai empresses, and all the people on board are women. But Hancock doesn't seem to be an empress at this time, and I don't know if she was caught by Tenryubito's idiots. Looking at the flag that looked like the sun surrounded by 9 snakes, Zhang Yang muttered to himself, and then thought of something, the corner of his mouth raised, and he said loudly, "Everyone pay attention, approach that pirate ship, but remember, don't attack. Don't attack." Listening to Zhang Yang's strange request, the sailors were stunned for a while, but then they all responded with a, "Yes," and they started to act one by one. The warship began to change direction and head towards the 9 snake pirates. At the same time, just as Zhang Yang ordered the warship to sail towards the 9 snake pirates, the 9 snake pirates boarded. "My Lady Empress, it's not good, the warship is approaching us." In the luxurious cabin, in front of the curtain, a woman with long orange-red hair and a delicate face ran in, wearing a simple 3-dimensional style and a cloak. There was a serious look on his face. "Just getting close." An uncontrollable and somewhat cringe voice came from behind the curtain, and then, the curtain seemed to be pulled open by herself, and an incomparably mature and enchanting woman walked out. The black and red clothes like a long skirt are close to the body, revealing his perfect figure. He is wearing a purple-red coat, and his brown hair is casually draped behind him. The delicate and mature face has a faint smile. She is a woman who can't help but be fascinated by her. She is the current emperor of Amazon Lily, the captain of the 9 snake pirates, Listel. Seeing Listel, the orange-red long-haired woman couldn't help lowering her head, and said in a somewhat adoring voice, "Yes, the Empress." Hearing this, Empress Listel frowned, and then walked straight out of the cabin. The orange-red long-haired woman quickly followed after seeing this. On the deck, a large group of beautiful female warriors were all in place, vigilantly staring at the slowly approaching warships in the distance and discussing a lot, but when they saw the Empress walking out, they suddenly became respectful. Knelt down on one knee, lowered his head and said in unison, "The Empress. Get up." The Empress smiled softly, then glanced at the warships approaching in the distance, paused, and pondered. "Everyone, don't attack for the time being. They shouldn't be here to arrest us, otherwise they should launch at this distance now. Attacked, but everyone still has to prepare for battle, wait and see what happens, and then follow my instructions if the situation is not right." Quote. "Yes, Empress." The female warriors replied without hesitation, looking at the Empress with reverence in their eyes. The Empress nodded, then glanced at everyone, a trace of doubt flashed in her beautiful eyes, and she said with some doubts, "Where are the 3 Boa sisters?" "We are here." A clear and pleasant voice came from above the Empress and the others. The Empress and the female warriors were stunned for a moment. When they looked up, they saw 3 little girls with very cute and delicate faces beckoning to them on the observation deck of the mainsail. "Hancock, Sandersonia, Marigold, how can you climb on top of the Empress? Don't hurry down," a female warrior shouted hurriedly. "Oh." The 3 girls curled their lips aggrieved, and then began to flexibly climb down from the trunk, but, crawling and crawling, the black-haired girl named Hancock seemed to feel something, and turned back a little strangely. Suddenly, exquisite, a very surprised expression appeared on the cute face. "Hancock, what are you doing? Why haven't you come down?" Upon seeing this, a female soldier shouted in dissatisfaction. The Empress shook her head helplessly and said, "Hancock, it's very dangerous up there, come down." Hancock didn't move at all, and stared into the distance in surprise. After a while, he couldn't help pointing to the distance and said in surprise, "Empress, someone is flying over." "Fly." The Empress and the other female warriors were stunned for a moment, and then they couldn't help turning their heads to look. Suddenly, everyone couldn't help but widen their eyes, as if they had seen something incredible. Because in the air in the direction of the warship, a slender figure was shooting towards them like a cannonball. Chapter 90. His target is Hancock. Among the 9 snake pirates, Zhang Yang is naturally their captain, the Emperor of Amazon Lily, Boa Hancock. She is known as the world's most beautiful woman, and she is also a master of 3-color hockey. Boa Hancock can be said to be a real. The strength and beauty are equally important, and the dream goddess in the hearts of countless people all over the world. Of course, that was in the future, and now Hancock is at most a very cute loli. But even so, Zhang Yang couldn't help but want to see this future first beauty. It wasn't that Zhang Yang was a pedophile, it was purely that he wanted to see the future queen's beautiful look when she was a child. Of course, if possible, it would be better to be able to bring Amazon Lily under his banner. After all, the female warriors of 9 Snake Island will all know hockey, although a single one is not particularly strong, but they are a bit scary together. Now, if they can be included under the banner, it will definitely be very beneficial for Zhang Yang to reform Marine in the future. It's just that, having said that, it's really harder than reaching the sky to achieve it. Somewhat amusingly, he shook his head, and shook off some wonderful thoughts in his mind. Zhang Yang turned his head and glanced at the 9 snake pirates who were still a long way away. He was a little dissatisfied and said to the sea soldier on the side, "Why is the speed so slow? Can't you be faster?" "Report, Major, at the current wind speed, this is already the fastest speed. If you want to speed up, you can only turn on the power system." "Do you want to turn it on?" said the sea soldier helplessly. Hearing this, Zhang Yang frowned and said after hesitation, "Forget it, you guys stop the boat and stand by, I'll go take a look myself." After speaking, Zhang Yang didn't wait for the sea soldier to react. He stepped on the foot, and the whole person rose to the sky. Then he stepped on the sole of the foot again in the air. With a bang sound, the white air wave spread, and Zhang Yang directly shot a 9. Turning 10 degrees, it shot straight towards the 9 snake pirates. This scene immediately made all the sailors on the deck stay for a while, and it took a while to react and start to stop the ship. On the other side, Zhang Yang's hair and marine coat were swayed wildly by the gusty wind. Holding a flaming blade in his hand, Zhang Yang shot towards the 9 snake pirates at a super fast speed. With a powerful gust of wind, it came to the sky above the 9 snake pirates. Boom! A dull sound sounded. Zhang Yang stepped on his feet. A white air wave spread out again, and Zhang Yang's extremely fast flying figure suddenly stopped in complete violation of the laws of physics, and stood above the 9 snake pirates. Looking on the deck, I couldn't help but stay for a while. Because he found that on the deck, a group of women who had exposed large areas of snow-white skin to the air were looking up at him in astonishment. One of the women was even more beautiful, and even Zhang Yang couldn't help but look absent-minded. For a moment, when I came back to my senses, Zhang Yang was in a bit of trouble. What should I say? "Hello. Hello. Nice to meet you." Many idiot-like greetings flashed through Zhang Yang's mind, but he didn't know how shocking the 9 snake pirates and others below were. Seeing Zhang Yang standing in the air so helplessly, the shock in their hearts can be imagined. After all, in human common sense, how could human beings do such a thing? Of course, not everyone thinks this way. For example, Liste, the captain of the 9 snake pirates and the current queen of Amazon Lily, looked at Zhang Yang standing out of thin air. After being stunned for a moment, her mind flashed a thought. Devil fruit ability. As the emperor of the Amazon and the captain of the 9 snakes pirates, she is naturally not as ignorant of the outside world as ordinary citizens. She still knows about devil fruits, such as Zhang Yang, which completely violates human cognition. Behavior. There can be no other explanation other than devil fruit. But then, the Empress couldn't help being a little suspicious and vigilant. Seeing the publicity's decoration is definitely marine, the current 9 snake pirates is just a little-known pirate group. In the past, Marine saw them either ignore it or directly to attack, but this publicity behavior really made her a little bit incomprehensible. Although Zhang Yang looks very young, the Empress will not underestimate Zhang Yang because of this. So after being stunned for a moment, The Empress twisted Meowman's body and took a few steps forward, looked up at Zhang Yang and smiled softly. Mr. Marine, what's the matter? Hearing the voice of the Empress, Zhang Yang also came back to his senses, but before he could speak, those stunned female warriors also came back to their senses because of the voice of the Empress. Watching Zhang Yang raise the bows and arrows or weapons in his hands, watching Zhang Yang vigilantly. Zhang Yang was stunned for a moment, then quickly raised his hand and said, "Don't get excited, I have no intention of arresting you. Look, I even told them to stop the warship." Hearing this, the female soldiers turned their heads subconsciously and couldn't help but be taken aback, because as Zhang Yang said, the warship did stop. "Put down your weapons." At this time, the female emperor also said. The female warriors hesitated, and then put down their weapons, but they still looked at Zhang Yang with vigilance. This is not the vigilance of Zhang Yang, but the vigilance of men. For the people of the Amazon, men are the most dangerous and terrifying creatures in their consciousness. "Mr. Marine, what is there to come to the 9 snake pirates?" the Empress said at this time. Hearing this, Zhang Yang scratched his head in embarrassment. Could it be that he wanted to see Hancock? Isn't it weird not to be regarded as a pervert? At the same time, looking at Listle, he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He is indeed the Emperor of Amazon. Although he is not as good as Hancock, he is also a first-class beauty. "Actually it's nothing." Zhang Yang smiled helplessly and said, "It's just that I saw your pirate ship shape as a bit rare, so I just came over to have a look. This is just the tradition of our country." The Empress replied with a smile, and then looked at Zhang Yang quietly. Seeing the Empress staring at him so quietly, Zhang Yang didn't know what to say for a while, so he glanced at the crowd, and when he saw a cute black-haired girl looking at him curiously, he couldn't bear it. Live brightly. Boa Hancock. Hancock also noticed Zhang Yang's gaze. As if he was frightened, he quickly looked away a little timidly. Seeing this, Zhang Yang couldn't help but laugh a little. This is the Empress who cannot be blasphemed in the future. I didn't expect to be a little scared after an hour. Queen Lister also noticed Zhang Yang's gaze, glanced at Hancock, frowned, then turned to Zhang Yang and said, "Is there anything else? If it's okay, Mr. Marine, please come back, we have to go to collect materials." "What?" Hearing this, Zhang Yang retracted his gaze. Knowing that the Empress wanted him to leave, he smiled helplessly. Since Hancock also saw it, "Let's go back, so as not to be suspected." "I'm sorry to disturb you, then I'll go first." Zhang Yang smiled apologetically, then turned around just as he was about to fly away, suddenly remembered something, turned his head and said, "Oh, by the way, remind me that there are a lot of traffickers recently, so keep an eye on the little girls on the boat." After speaking, Zhang Yang didn't stop any longer, stepped on his feet, and shot directly towards the warship. After a while, Zhang Yang returned to the warship, and the warship slowly sailed into the distance. Looking at this scene, not only the female warriors, but also the Empress couldn't help being stunned for a while, and just left, really without any purpose. "Empress, should we leave this place? That Marine is probably going back to look for reinforcements." A female soldier couldn't help but said with some worry. "No, that Marine is a little different. I can feel it, he really doesn't have any ill will towards us." The Queen shook her head and said, looking at the distant warship, a strange color flashed in her eyes, and then she looked at some curiously. Hancock looked at the distant warship. "Hancock, do you know that person?" the Empress asked suddenly. "I don't know." Hancock shook his head innocently. "Empress, Hancock and the 3 sisters are going to sea with us for the first time this time, how could they know Marine?" Another female warrior couldn't help but said. "Hancock may not know him, but that Marine should know Hancock." The Empress shook her head and said something that surprised everyone. "He knows me." Hancock was also surprised. "That's right." The Empress glanced at the distant warship. A strange light flashed in her eyes, and said softly, "If I guessed correctly, that Marine's target is Hancock." After speaking, the Empress took another look at Hancock, who had a bewildered face, and murmured, Besides, the last sentence he left also made me very concerned. Is he suggesting something? At the same time, on the other side, on Zhang Yang's exclusive warship, Zhang Yang looked at the 9 snake pirates from a distance, shook his head and muttered, I hope my reminder is useful, such a cute little loli, I really can't bear to let it go. She was mutilated by Tenryubito. Chapter 91 I'm going to go to Mermaid Island to play. Sabayati Archipelago, the changes that have taken place recently are not too big. It seems that the occasional disappearance incident does not appear again. Not to mention, even the pirates who usually do evil things seem to be afraid of something, but they have changed a lot. The biggest ones still belong to 1 to 29 GR. In the past, the illegal areas that ordinary people kept away from, the pirates and human traffickers have completely disappeared, replaced by the tall and straight marines. The illegal areas have become the rule of law areas, and even recently, some people have started to move to 1 to 29 GR to start living. Of course, it is clear to everyone that this change in Sabayati Archipelago was entirely due to Marine's sudden cleaning of the illegal area some time ago. Therefore, Marine's status was greatly improved in the hearts of the residents of Sabayati Archipelago. Wherever you go, you can be warmly treated by the residents. It has to be said that this change can really be said to be earth-shaking. Returning to Sabayati Archipelago's 63 GR Marine branch, in Vasik's former office, listening to the figure behind the desk talking about the recent changes in Sabayati Archipelago, Zhang Yang couldn't help raising the corner of his mouth. The impact is pretty good. Major Zhang Yang, I have already received news from the headquarters. Are you being transferred to the G5 Marine branch in New World? However, it is not a safe place. Don't you think about it again? Behind the desk, a bearded middle-aged Marine frowned and looked at Zhang Yangdao. He is the Marine Headquarters Rear Admiral, who was transferred by the headquarters after Zhang Yang and Voss returned to the headquarters. Oder is naturally familiar with the name of Zhang Yang's genius, but he feels that the approach of the headquarters this time is a bit inappropriate, no matter how talented Zhang Yang is. I'm too young now, doesn't it mean to push Zhang Yang into a fire pit in a dangerous place like the New World? I really don't want to see a genius die prematurely, so Odd couldn't help but persuade Zhang Yang. Zhang Yang naturally knew that he was underestimated, but he was too lazy to explain, so he smiled and said, Thank you Rear Admiral for reminding me, I am still looking forward to this trip to the New World. Hearing this, Rear Admiral was stunned for a while, then shook his head helplessly and sighed. Since that's the case, then I won't say anything more. I'll go and apply for you to enter the New World through Mariajoy later. This is not needed for the time being. Zhang Yang scratched his head and said, I don't plan to enter the New World through Mariajoy. Before entering the New World, I plan to visit Mermaid Island. Mermaid Island. Oder Vivi frowned and said, this route is not very safe. In the deep sea of 10,000 meters, no one knows what will happen at any time. Major Zhang Yang, are you sure you want to go to Mermaid Island? It is more difficult to go directly through Mariajoy. Safe. If I'm afraid of danger, I won't be a marine. How can I not visit a fairy tale place like Fishman Island? Zhang Yang chuckled. Oder was stunned for Vivi again, and then he couldn't help but smile and said, Well said, how can you be afraid of danger as a marine? In this case, don't worry. I will prepare experienced navigators and coatings for you. Workers, as long as you are careful, you should have no problem getting to Fishman Island. Quote. Thank you very much. Zhang Yang nodded, then looked in the direction of the illegal zone from the window, and Vivi raised the corner of his mouth and said, But the coder is fine. I know a good coder, and I will ask him for this matter. That's fine. There are indeed quite a few coders with good craftsmanship on Sabayati Archipelago. Oder nodded and said nothing. Then without further ado, Rear Admiral, I'm leaving. Zhang Yang stood up and said, then pushed the door and walked out of the office, leaving only Oder sitting behind the desk and Vivi stunned, and then he reacted. How does it feel like I'm the Major and he's the Rear Admiral? With a wry smile and saying the words Vosk had said before, Odd shook his head, lowered his head and continued to look at the document in his hand. The original Outlaw Zone, 10GR. The blue sky, white clouds, today is a good weather again. With the existence of marine, here is no longer the lifeless atmosphere of the past, and began to become a little angry, although not many, but some residents did start to move here to live. Alva is one of them, but rather than moving here, he is looking for business opportunities, because he is not an ordinary person, but a real estate developer. As a professional real estate developer, when others were hesitating whether to move into the original illegal zone, he had already moved here first, exploring the situation here, and the result naturally made Alva ecstatic. He didn't go to other places so he didn't know, but the 10th GR was absolutely in line with his requirements. The terrain here is wide and the environment is beautiful. It is very suitable for living. However, now Alva has encountered a little trouble, because he found that the best and most valuable piece of land in 10GR was occupied by an ugly bar, which made Alva very dissatisfied, so today, he thought he was going to talk to the owner of the bar. Pushing aside the bar called Shacky's ripping off bar, he walked in. Looking at the simple layout inside, Alva couldn't help frowning. It was a waste, it was a waste. Welcome, little brother, what do you need? Just as Alva was looking at the simple arrangement around him, a magnetic female voice came over. Alva turned his head to look, and couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. A wild but gentle-looking woman appeared in his eyes. Are you the owner of this bar? After returning to his senses, Alva couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. He was really afraid that the owner of this shop was a vicious guy. Since he was a woman, it would be easier to handle. Yes, I'm the owner of this bar. The woman, the bar owner, smiled, lit a cigarette and held it between her red lips. She glanced at Alva and said with a light smile, little brother, I think you shouldn't just come to drink tea, right? What's the matter? Hearing this, Alva was stunned for a moment. He didn't expect this woman to be quite sensitive. It seems that it may not be so easy to succeed. Cough. It's like this. After coughing a few times, Alva's face became solemn, and she said seriously to the bar owner, I am the current marine prosecutor of Sabayati Archipelago. I hope you can move this bar out of here. Of course, I will also arrange one for you. Better place. Quote. Prosecutor. The proprietress exhaled a cigarette, looked at Alva with a smile, and said with a chuckle, why move out? It seems that Marine has allowed anyone to live here now, right? Hearing this, Alva's face froze immediately, and then his eyes turned, and his face returned to normal seriousness. I'm sorry, this is a military secret, and I can't disclose it to you. Military secret. The proprietress looked at Alva with a smile, and didn't look away until Alva was a little uncomfortable. She looked behind Alva and jokingly said, Little Zhang Yang, do you Marines still have such military secrets? You Marine. Hearing the words of the proprietress, Alva's body froze suddenly, and his face turned back stiffly, and his face suddenly turned pale, because he found out that a Marine officer wearing a Marine coat also came in, standing in front of him. Behind him, that is to say, he heard what he said just now. I said, don't call me Xiao Zongyang. Marine, that is. Zhang Yang rolled his eyes, said dissatisfied with the proprietress, Shaky, then looked at Alva with a stiff face in front of him, looked him up and down, and said unceremoniously, yes, go as far as you can, and next time let me see you pretending to be Marine, I'll show you the real Marine. Yes, I'll go now. I'll go now. Hearing Zhang Yang's voice, Alva also came back to his senses and ran out in a panic. At the same time, he couldn't help but feel a little depressed. No wonder he can open a bar in such a place. It turns out that there is a backstage. Alva fled from here in a panic. In the bar, Zhang Yang sat casually in front of the bar, and put the flowing blade in his hand on the bar. He chuckled softly. Old rules, just have something to eat. Hearing this, Shaki gave Zhang Yang a blank look, and he didn't say much, and directly gave Zhang Yang a few sandwiches. Did you change knives? Shaki glanced at Ruor and Ruahuo, recalling the knife before, and couldn't help but ask. Well, that's right. Zhang Yang answered vaguely while eating a sandwich. Seeing this, Shaki shook his head helplessly. He didn't continue to ask questions, but waited for Zhang Yang to finish eating before continuing to say, come to find Rayleigh. Well, Rayleigh can coat, right? I want him to coat my boat. Zhang Yang said while wiping his mouth with a napkin. Coating. Shaki packed up the plate and looked at Zhang Yang with some doubts. Zhang Yang nodded and grinned Isho. I'm going to go to Mermaid Island to play. Chapter 92 Departure, Fishman Island. Go to Mermaid Island. Hearing Zhang Yang's words, Shaki couldn't help being stunned for a while, then thought of something and reacted, looked at Zhang Yang in surprise and said, are you going to the New World? Yeah, due to the cleanup of the illegal area, it is not convenient for me to continue to stay in Sabayati Archipelago, so I was appointed to the New World G5 Marine Branch. Zhang Yang nodded. Shaki also nodded, but he couldn't help but feel a little surprised. He cleaned up the illegal area Tenryubito used for playing, but he was not punished. It seems that the Marine headquarters really attaches great importance to Zhang Yang. Gao, but Shaki felt a little relieved when he thought of the power that Zhang Yang had shown before. With so much power at such an age, it's strange that Marine doesn't regard him as a treasure. However, you are Marine, should you be able to enter the New World directly from Mariajoy? Isn't this safer? Shaki asked with some doubts. Didn't you say it? I'm going to Fishman Island to play. Zhang Yang raised his eyebrows and said with some anticipation, that is a famous tourist attraction on the Great Waterway. After going to the New World, you must be dealing with pirates all day. It would be a pity if you don't take advantage of it now. Shaki suddenly felt a little speechless. Going to the New World is obviously a very serious topic. Why does it feel different when it comes to this little guy? By the way, what about Uncle Rayleigh? Didn't you see him? Zhang Yang asked, looking left and right. I don't know, he's gone since the last time you left, but there's no news now. Shaki spread his hands. Zhang Yang was stunned, and then he remembered that Rayleigh really likes to run around in the original book, but fortunately, he has a Reiatsu that is better than observation haki. Last time, he had memorized Rayleigh's Reiatsu. Not difficult. It's okay, I have a way to find him. Grinning Isho at Shaki, Zhang Yang closed his eyes, and then spread his perception out, and after a while, Zhang Yang opened his eyes with a smile on his face. Found it. Zhang Yang said with a light smile, picked up the Ruo Ren Ruahuo on the table and planned to leave, but then thought of something, patted his head, took out 100 Baileys from his pocket and put it on the counter. Shaki, I'm leaving first, I'll see you later when I have a chance. Zhang Yang waved his hand and said with a smile, then pushed the door and ran out, leaving only a stunned Shaki for a while before he recovered, and murmured, he just used observation haki. Just when Zhang Yang went to the location of Rayleigh, on the coast of 52GR, a pirate ship that had been plated. Rayleigh, who was checking whether there was any problem with the coating, raised his head, glanced at 10GR's response in surprise, and said with a chuckle, Zhang Yang. It looks like he came to me. Old man, what are you mumbling about? Have you checked it out? If you have checked it out, get out of here, this uncle is going to see. Rayleigh, a sturdy man with a fierce face, was sitting on the cargo box, playing with a machete in his hand, while staring at Rayleigh fiercely, and beside him, there was a large group of hundreds of people. Pirates are around. They are the masters of this pirate ship. It's been checked, there are 630,000 Baileys in total, let's count you as 60 Baileys. Rayleigh stood up and chuckled as he looked at the ferocious pirates. 60,000 Baileys. The big man with the machete grinned Isho, the machete in his hand smashed on the deck, with a bang sound. The plywood covered with a layer of bubble film suddenly exploded, and the sawdust flew horizontally, leaving a huge trail on it. Knife horizontal. It's best not to attack the bubbles at all, otherwise there is a chance of breakage. Rayleigh still had a smile on his face, which made the big man's face stiff. "Old man, do you know who I am?" The big man stood up, his huge body covered the sun, and he looked down at Rayleigh with a grin and said, "I'm the famous captain of the messy pirates, the Hungry Wolf, with a reward of 34 million Rayleigh. I still want money. If you don't want to die, get the hell out of here." "Hee hee. That's right, old man, just be obedient and get out of here." "Or do you want to be killed by us?" No, I think it's better to sell slaves, but there seems to be nowhere to buy slaves now. It seems that I can only kill, ha ha ha." The surrounding pirates also laughed in unison, and Rayleigh shook his head helplessly, and then his eyes glared fiercely. An extremely domineering and oppressive aura spread out centered on Rayleigh. The pirates' laughter stopped abruptly, their eyes widened, and then the whites of their eyes rolled up, and one by one lost consciousness and fell to the ground. The current pirates. With a helpless sigh, Rayleigh walked over to the big man and groped on him, then took out a bulging purse, shook his head and said, "It's really hard to make some money." Stains. I didn't expect Rayleigh, the king of the underworld, to steal money from this little pirate. A somewhat joking voice suddenly came, and Rayleigh moved Vivi for a while, then stood up and looked at Zhang Yang, who was sitting on the side of the boat at some point, and smiled indifferently. "Now it's just a coder for drinking some wine. Just a bad old man." "Cut. Is there a bad old man who can use Conqueror hockey?" Zhang Yang pouted, then looked at the plated film on the pirate ship, nodded with satisfaction, and said to Rayleigh, "Uncle Rayleigh, please help me coat my warship too." "Are you going to Fishman Island?" Rayleigh looked at Zhang Yang in surprise, because in his impression, Marine rarely went to Fishman Island. "Well, I've been appointed to the New World, and I want to stop by Fishman Island to play." Zhang Yang nodded. Hearing this, Rayleigh smiled silently, nodded and said, "Yes, but where is your warship? It's better to drive here, otherwise it's not very suitable for me to show up." "No problem, you wait here, I'll have someone drive the warship over." Zhang Yang nodded and said, and then stepped on his feet. The whole person rose into the sky and flew towards the marine base. After 10 minutes, Zhang Yang came here with the warship. After letting all the marines board the pirate ship and taking those pirates along with the pirate ship, only Zhang Yang was left on the warship. Whoosh! Rayleigh walked out from behind the trees on the coast and jumped directly onto the warship. After taking a few glances, he pondered, with the scale of this ship, it can be coated in about 4 days. 4 days. Zhang Yang nodded. So, for the next 4 days, the coating of the warship was handed over to Rayleigh, while Zhang Yang stayed at the marine base for 4 days. Soon, the 4 days passed, and Zhang Yang came to the 52GR coast again. The warship has been plated with a layer of bubble film. This is a precaution, just leave it to the navigators, they know how to operate. Behind the big tree by the coast, Rayleigh handed a manual to Zhang Yangdao. "Well, I see." Zhang Yang put it away, and then thanked Rayleigh. "Thank you very much, Uncle Rayleigh, then I'll go first, see you when I have a chance." Rayleigh nodded with a smile. Upon seeing this, Zhang Yang turned around and walked to the coast, took the sailors who were already on standby here on board the warship, and handed over the precautions to a middle-aged sailor with glasses. "Don't worry, Major Zhang Yang, I've been to Fishman Island a few times before, and there won't be any problems." Sailor Eyes said seriously. He was the navigator that Odd brought for Zhang Yang. "Well, then, let's go." Zhang Yang waved. After a while, the warship sank to the bottom of the sea in the surging waves as the bubble film bulged and completely covered the warship. Behind the big tree on the coast, watching this scene, Rayleigh's eyes flashed with an unintelligible light, and the corner of his mouth couldn't help showing a smile. The new world is going to be lively now. Chapter 93 Sudden Attack. The icy waters, the endless darkness, and the occasional huge black shadows and strange chirping sounds. This is the place that human beings can almost never set foot in, the deep sea. Cold, dark and intimidating, this is the true portrayal of the deep sea. However, today, in this dark and cold deep sea, it is extremely rare to welcome a group of guests. This is a medium-sized warship wrapped in huge bubbles. It is not very bright, and it can even be said that some dim lights only illuminate the warship and the sea water at a little distance around it. It is slowly moving forward under the impetus of the current. Right. On the deck, a famous sailor looked nervously at the dark water around him. Occasionally, a huge black shadow slowly swam by the warship, which would cause a tremor. On the bow of the ship, a middle-aged man with glasses. Nien Marine looked at the record pointer in his hand with a serious face, raising his head from time to time, as if confirming something. Except for the occasional chirping of some kind of creature, the entire warship was silent. Stomping on. In this silence, a slight footstep sounded suddenly. Almost everyone on the deck looked at it subconsciously, and their faces suddenly became solemn, and they quickly saluted, Major Zhang Yang. Zhang Yang nodded with a smile, then looked at the middle-aged Marine wearing glasses and said, Major Bernie, how long does it take to get to Mermaid Island? About 2 more hours. Middle-aged Marine, the navigator Oder arranged for Zhang Yang, and Bernie, who is also a major, heard the words and said solemnly, we have passed the descending currents and submarine volcanoes, and now we only need to find the deep-sea trenches. It is 10,000 meters deep where Fishman Island is located, but there are many unknown sea monsters in the deep sea, so the warship can only turn on the weak searchlight to be careful going. I am afraid it will take more time than expected. Quote. Hearing this, Zhang Yang nodded his head with a vague understanding. Indeed, no matter which world he is in, the deep sea will always be the most mysterious and dangerous, and even the current Zhang Yang would not dare to mess around. 2 hours. Nodding his head, Zhang Yang smiled at Major Bernie and said, then I'll trouble you, Major Bernie. No trouble, Major Zhang Yang, go back to rest first. I'll have someone call you when you get there. Bernie pushed his glasses and smiled as well. Although Zhang Yang has the same military rank as him, and his seniority is much worse, he never dared to regard Zhang Yang as a junior. After all, although Zhang Yang is not very famous in the sea now, but in marine, especially recently when the Marshal revealed that Zhang Yang would play the dead Akainu as an admiral candidate, now Zhang Yang can really be said to be known to everyone. Although the current Zhang Yang is only a major, most people know that this is only temporary. As long as the time is up, Zhang Yang will be one of the admirals in the Marine headquarters. How could such a character Bernie not be the best attitude to treat it? Well, then thank you very much. Zhang Yang almost knew what Bernie was thinking, nodded, turned and walked back to the cabin. Bernie slowly put away the smile on his face, and seriously began to observe the changes in the warship's route. Zhang Yang, who returned to the room, glanced at Vosk who was still staring at the cakes in a daze, shook his head helplessly, sat opposite Vosk and poured a cup of tea, and said helplessly, you keep staring like this. It's useless, just wait, you will be hungry when you should be hungry, you can't be in a hurry. Hearing this, Vosk raised his head and glanced at Zhang Yang, then sighed and looked away helplessly. To be honest, although I know that Zhang Yang has no reason to lie to him, it is unbelievable that he can become stronger when he is hungry, although it is hard to believe that he exists now. I understand, but what else can I do with this? Vosk sighed. No, take it and see. Zhang Yang took out a small notebook from his pocket and threw it to Vosk. Looking at Vosk with a puzzled expression, he smiled and said, this is what you will cultivate in the future. Although you can't practice it yet, it's good to prepare in advance. Cultivation. Vosk looked at Zhang Yang suspiciously, then hesitated, opened the notebook and looked at it. After a while, Vosk's eyes widened and he looked at the contents of the notebook in disbelief. Major Zhang Yang, can the things written on it really be practiced? Vosk stared at Zhang Yang with wide eyes and couldn't help standing up and said. The content in the notebook was really shocking to him. What kind of spirit child, chant, breaking the Tao, binding the Tao, etc., this is simply unheard of. In Vosk's view, this is not something that human beings can cultivate at all. Something that exists in the stories of those novelists. Looking at Vosk with an unbelievable expression, He grinned Isho, and waved his hand directly, letting Vasek understand the facts in the most direct way. One of the ways to bind. What? As Zhang Yang's words fell, Vask couldn't help but change his face instantly. An invisible force wrapped around him instantly. His hands were uncontrollably chained behind him, and the whole person fell directly to the ground, unable to move. This is the way of ghosts. Should it be said that humans can't use it? Zhang Yang walked up to Vasek, looked down at him and said with a light smile, then a thought moved, and he released the bondage. Vasek immediately felt relieved. That was the ghost way just now. Can I really learn it? Vasek stood up in a trance, looked at Zhang Yang and couldn't help asking in a daze. Of course. Zhang Yang nodded, then paused, and continued, but now you are definitely not good. Only if you feel hungry, it means that your body has begun to generate spiritual power, and then you can start to cultivate. So now, work hard. Take a look at the cultivation methods I wrote for you, so as not to spend time studying how to improve your spiritual power when you can cultivate. Well, understand. After getting Zhang Yang's affirmative answer, Vasek couldn't help nodding excitedly, then as if thinking of something, his face became solemn. He looked at Zhang Yang seriously and said, "Thank you, Major Zhang Yang, you have helped me so much. Knowing that you want to change Marine, I will absolutely do my best to help you whenever you need it." Quote. Zhang Yang was stunned for a while, then said with a smile, "Then you should understand what is written on it first." "I'll try my best," Vas said firmly, then sat back on the stool again and carefully looked at the contents of the notebook. Seeing this, a strange color flashed in Zhang Yang's eyes, and then he also sat cross-legged on the bed and began to improve his spiritual power little by little. The next time was peaceful, without the thrill of the Straw Hat Pirates in the original book. 2 hours later, with the knock on the door and the voice of the sea soldiers, Zhang Yang opened his eyes and glanced at the stills. Vask, who was watching Guido's detailed explanation, didn't bother him, pushed the door and walked out to the deck. Suddenly, the long-lost light made him squinting his eyes, and it took him a while to open his eyes. In the sea not far away, a beautiful island like a fairy tale appeared in his house. In his eyes, the surroundings seemed to be bright as if the sun was shining, and occasionally, a few giant sea kings swam by. Fishman Island. It's finally here. A flash of amazement flashed in Zhang Yang's eyes. Anime is anime after all, and the Fishman Island in reality is far more shocking than in anime. Report, a ship is found in the rear left, suspected to be a pirate ship. Zhang Yang was amazed at the grandeur of Fishman Island when a navy's shout suddenly came to his mind. Then, the entire warship seemed to have been hit by something. With a boom, the hull vibrated violently. Assault. There was a flash of sternness in Zhang Yang's eyes, and he turned his head to look, only to see a pirate ship also wrapped in bubbles approaching them in the distance. So what happened to the collision just now? Chapter 94 Fishman Pirates. All ready for battle. Gunner, aim at the pirate ship behind. The hull was suddenly hit by an unknown object, and Bernie and the sailors naturally reacted quickly. As Bernie gave an order with a solemn face, the sailors suddenly took action one by one, and the gunners ran to the cannons to fill up. After loading the cannonball, he aimed the muzzle at the pirate ship that was slowly approaching behind the warship, while the other sailors all picked up the firearms behind them, distributed them all over the deck, and watched the surroundings vigilantly. In just 10 seconds, the Marines completed the defense. It has to be said that the individual combat effectiveness of ordinary Marines may not be enough, but their work efficiency is definitely the highest. Major Zhang Yang, please be careful. I have long heard that there is a group of Fishman pirates on Mermaid Island. I am afraid we have met this time. Bernie walked over to Zhang Yang with a dignified expression. Fishman pirates. Zhang Yang couldn't help frowning. In this era, the contradiction between Mermaid Island and human beings has become increasingly intensified. Fishman pirates are still in the most inconvenient deep sea. It's a little troublesome. Scratching his head and sighing, Zhang Yang's eyes suddenly narrowed, and he looked to the right side of the ship. A big lavender hand with a pimple suddenly clawed on it, and then slammed hard. Click. Countless cracks appeared on the side of the ship, and then, an unusually strong lilac figure turned over and came to the ship. With a huge height of about 2.6 meters, lilac skin, a sharp saw-like nose, a shark-like mouth and teeth, and exuding a violent aura, it is obvious that this is a fish man. Don't move. All the Marines immediately pointed their guns at the fish man. Oh, is it really Marine? Hundreds of guns were pointed at the same time, but this fish man looked completely disregarded, glanced at everyone, and grinned. But it doesn't matter, whether it's Marine or pirates. Well, the mere low-level creatures should look like low-level creatures, lying on the ground shivering and praying for our mercy. Laughing wildly, Fishman stepped on his feet hard, and the deck burst violently, rushing towards the sailors. Shoot! Shoot! Bernie's expression changed suddenly, and he shouted, and the sailors also changed their expressions, and all pulled the trigger in their hands. Bang bang bang. As the gunshots rang out, countless bullets shot towards Fishman. However, as the mermaid easily dodged left and right, all the bullets were missed. Lower creatures, go to hell. Fishman laughed wildly and rushed to the front of the sailors, his huge arms raised high, and he swung towards them in the eyes of the sailors in horror. Voice. It is foreseeable that once hit by this force, these sailors will be crippled even if they cannot afford it. This scene immediately shocked Bernie. He didn't expect the Fishman pirates to be so strong. If they continue to develop, I'm afraid they will really be buried under the sea this time, but what can he do if he has no fighting power? Woolen cloth. For a moment, many thoughts flashed through Bernie's mind, and then he subconsciously looked at Zhang Yang on the side, but couldn't help but be stunned, because he found that Zhang Yang was no longer by his side. Boom! An explosion suddenly sounded on the deck, and Bernie, who was a little dazed, suddenly came back to his senses, and quickly turned his head to look. He couldn't help being sluggish for a while. In front of those frightened sailors, Fishman was already lying on the ground. The powerful force caused the deck to collapse a little, and countless cracks spread. On Fishman's back, I don't know when Zhang Yang appeared. Sitting there with a smile on his face, he pressed Fishman's head on the deck with his right hand, making him unable to move. How is that possible? I didn't even see when he did it. Is this the strength of the backup admiral? Seeing this scene, Bernie couldn't help but muttered in shock in his heart. No matter how Zhang Yang disappeared or how he subdued Fishman, he didn't see it at all. He has such a strong strength at such an age. As expected, is the most talented, monster-level, talent in Marine's history. Not only Bernie, but the sailors on the deck were also shocked to see Zhang Yang, who subdued Fishman in an instant. They had no idea how Zhang Yang appeared and how he subdued Fishman. For a while, the surroundings were silent. However, at this moment, Fishman's untimely voice remembered. Damn human, let go of me, ah! Fishman kept screaming and struggling under Zhang Yang, his face on the deck, staring at Zhang Yang with bloodthirsty eyes, and as he exerted his strength, he slowly struggled to get off the ground. Oh! Zhang Yang was stunned for a moment. This guy's strength is really exaggerated. He is indeed a Fishman with 10 times the arm strength of a human being. There was a hint of playfulness in Zhang Yang's eyes, and then his body flashed and left Fishman's back. Damn low-level creatures. How dare humans attack Fishman? I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill. As soon as Zhang Yang left, Fishman immediately roared and stood up, but he just stood up, and before the words in his mouth were finished, Zhang Yang's light words entered his ears. The 30 mouths of the binding Tao flashed 3 times. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. With Zhang Yang's wave of one hand, 3 golden energy flakes shot out instantly. Before Fishman could react, his hands and waist were hit, and he flew out. Bang! Fishman was pinned to the cabin by 3 energy flakes, and suddenly screamed and struggled. Damn it, what did you do to me? Fishman angrily roared and struggled, but the thin 3-layer energy sheet made him unable to break free no matter what. It's nothing, just to keep you quiet. Zhang Yang smiled lightly, then turned his head and glanced at the pirate ship that was already close at hand, and said to Bernie, who was sluggish beside him, "Major Bernie, I'll leave it to you here, I'll take care of that pirate ship." After speaking, John Young didn't wait for Bernie to answer. His foot collapsed, and the whole person shot out immediately, directly breaking through the bubbles and entering the seawater, and then the soles of his feet stepped on the ground in the seawater. With a bang sound, the seawater was agitated. John Young directly broke through the bubble and entered the pirate ship, and gently landed on the deck. Whew! As soon as John Young's soles landed on the deck, there were loud shouts all around him. John Young turned his head to look, and saw a group of fishmen holding weapons around John Young. Stunned. Human. After being stunned for a while, the fishman burst into laughter, and a fishman who looked like a catfish grinned. "It looks like it's Marine from that warship. Brother Arlong is so interesting, he even specially throwing one for us to play with. Human, what do you want me to do with you?" Ha ha ha. Having said that, the other fishman also laughed maliciously. Arlong. John Young teased Isho, looking at the fishman laughing around. The huge spiritual pressure in his body spewed out, pressing down on these fishmen. Boom. A depressing, heavy spiritual pressure enveloped all the fishmons, and the air seemed to be trembling with a humming sound. All the fishmons stared at John Young with wide-eyed and frightened faces. What is this? Is this feeling of being so heavy that people can't resist? Is it emanating from this human being? How is this possible? Fishmons were shocked, but John Young was not polite. Looking at the fishmons who were horrified under the reiatsu, they moved their feet and rushed towards the fishmons in an instant. In a few minutes. This is the fishman pirates. It must be too weak. I really don't understand how they got along so well in East Blue in the future. John Young was sitting on the side of the boat, touching his chin and muttering with dissatisfaction, and in front of him was a group of fishmen who had fallen into a coma. That's right, the fishman pirates, that is, the Arlong pirates that occupied Nami's village of Kokoja in the future, saw Arlong on the warship and recognized his identity as soon as John Young. But in John Yang's opinion, these fishmons are really too weak, they are nothing but brute force. No wonder even Luffy, who has just left the sea, can beat him. Forget it, no matter what, let's go to Mermaid Island first. After sitting for a while, John Young was a little bored, and then found a long rope to tie all the fishmen. Holding one end of the rope, John Young stepped on his feet again, and the deck cracked, and led them towards the warship. Chapter 95 Entering Fishman Island. Boo! With a soft sound from the bubble, John Young, who was soaked, dragged a bunch of unconscious fishmen back to the deck of the warship, wiped the water droplets from his face, and threw the rope in his hand. On the deck, Arlong was still nailed to the wall of the cabin by the flamboyant ghost road. The surrounding Marines held guns against his head, causing Arlong to roar constantly. As for the other Marines, they were on guard against the enemy. As the rival. Seeing that John Young suddenly returned to the warship with a group of comatose fishmen, everyone was stunned. Arlong's eyes widened, and he couldn't help staring gloomily at John Young and roared, "Stupid human, how dare you do such a thing to our fishman? I will definitely kill you. Come on, stupid human, you think you are Ultraman." John Young pouted, then touched his wet hair and clothes, turned his head to a dazed sailor beside him and said, "Please get me a towel." "Yes, Major John Young." The sailor came back to his senses immediately, gave a flattered salute, and then hurried to the cabin. On the side, Bernie, who was about to say something, heard this sentence and couldn't help but stay for a while. Just now, John Young seemed to have entered the sea. But, isn't he a devil fruit person? Bernie looked at John Young, who was soaked in disbelief. After a while, he finally couldn't help asking, "Major John Young, are you not a devil fruit person? How can?" Although Bernie didn't say anything later, John Young couldn't understand it, and the corners of his mouth twitched invisibly. "Your sister, forget about this, devil fruit is such a fool." VV's eyes flashed. John Yang's face remained unchanged, and he shook his head with a light smile. "You remember, I was just speeding up when I entered the sea. Going through the sea is completely based on inertia. No matter how powerful a fantasy fruit is, it is still a devil fruit. How can you not be afraid of seawater? Quote. So it is. Hearing this, Bernie finally accepted it, and he had no doubts. After all, the distance between the two boats was not too long, and it was not impossible for someone as powerful as Zhang Yang. It's just that he admires Zhang Yang. This kind of behavior is easy to say, but it's not necessarily true. If something goes wrong, it will really be buried at the bottom of the sea, but Zhang Yang can act directly without any hesitation, no matter what. Whether it comes from self-confidence or something, this is something that Bernie's flattery can't match. Bernie sighed inwardly, and Zhang Yang let out a long sigh of relief. It seems that he should pay more attention in the future. It is best not to touch the water where there are people, at least, not until he has the strength to disdain the heroes. By the way, Major Zhang Yang, what are these fish men going to do? Bernie asked suddenly. Hearing this, Zhang Yang glanced at Arlong and the other comatose fishman who were staring at him fiercely, and pondered, tie it up and enter Fishman Island first. Understood. Bernie nodded, and then ordered some marines to take care of the fishmons, and the warship set off again, heading for the main entrance of Fishman Island. After Zhang Yang returned to the cabin and told Voss to stop running around, he returned to the deck and looked up at Fishman Island, which was like a dream island in the huge bubble. Let myself be so shocked, it seems that my knowledge is still too little. When you return from the new world, let's go and see all over the world. Zhang Yang thought to himself that he had finally traveled back and forth, and it would be a pity if he didn't take a good look at this world. Not only is it publicity, except Bernie who has been to Fishman Island, other Marines are also looking at the Fishman Island that is getting closer and closer. After all, for those who are basically at the bottom of Marine, if normally speaking, I am afraid I will never have the opportunity to come to such a place. And just when everyone reacted differently, at the entrance to the main entrance of Fishman Island, the border guard, in a room full of surveillance screens. Hey, there's a boat coming, notify the guards to prepare for an inspection. A fishman soldier was drinking a cup of coffee, and when he glanced at the shadow of the ship gradually approaching on the screen, he said indifferently. Again, must be those bastard pirates again. Another fishman soldier said with some dissatisfaction after hearing the words, and then he held the phone bug in one hand and looked at the screen at the same time, but when he saw the appearance of the ship, he couldn't help but change. Exclaimed, warship, it's Marine. What, Marine? The fishman soldier holding the coffee was startled, and he didn't care if the coffee was spilled on his body. He stood up abruptly, stared at the warship on the screen with wide eyes and exclaimed, why did Marine come to fish? Man Island, haven't they left it alone? I don't know, but this is a big event. Another fishman soldier shook his head, looked at the warship that was gradually approaching on the screen with a serious face, and waved his hand. Let the guards open the corridor, and immediately contact Ryugu Castle to inform the king that Marine is coming to Fishman Island. Understood. Several fishman soldiers nodded immediately, then simultaneously picked up the phone bug and started to notify the border guard and contact Ryugu Castle. Meanwhile, at the main entrance of Fishman Island. How do I get in here, and use the phone bug to contact the people inside? On the deck, Zhang Yang looked at the circular entrance of the confinement, and asked Bernie beside him with some doubts. Don't contact them. Bernie shook his head and explained, there is a guard from Fishman Island at the entrance. Once a boat approaches them, they will open the entrance and conduct an inspection and registration before they can officially enter Fishman Island. Zhang Yang nodded. There seems to be such a statement in the original book. If someone like Luffy entered Fishman Island, they would be wanted by the Fishman Island army as illegal immigrants. Zhang Yang was thinking, just as Bernie said, the entrance has been slowly opened, revealing the bubble channel and half of the water in it. Turn the rudder and go to the entrance. Upon seeing this, Bernie gave an order, and the sailors acted immediately. The warship slowly came to the entrance and hit the bubble film at the entrance. It also entered the water flow of the bubble channel and followed the water to going in Fishman Island. Very interesting design. Looking at this scene, Zhang Yang muttered in amazement in his heart, that Sabayati Archipelago can't compare to Sabayati Archipelago, who can use bubble technology to such a degree. Soon, the warship sailed out of the bubble channel. Outside the bubble channel, there was a crescent-shaped bay very similar to Marin Vando. At this time, many Fishman soldiers were already standing on the bay, and the warship slowly approached. Aside from Boss in the cabin and a few sailors who were left to watch the ship, Zhang Yang, Bernie, and about 500 sailors all walked down. When the Fishman soldiers who had been waiting here for a long time saw this, a slightly taller Fishman soldier came out and shouted, "Fishman Island Border Guard, all salutes." Snapped. As soon as the words fell, all the Fishman soldiers gave a neat salute. Zhang Yang was stunned for a while, still want to do this. Bernie glanced at Zhang Yang, saw that Zhang Yang had no reaction, and sighed helplessly. It seems that although this genius is very strong, he is not very good at military etiquette. Sighing, Bernie looked solemn, and also shouted, "All salutes." Snapped. All the Marines also saluted neatly. "Hello, I'm Frontier Guard Captain Hanny." The tall fishman who had shouted earlier stepped forward and smiled. "Hello, I'm Major Marine, Bernie." Bernie also smiled. On the side, Zhang Yang, who was watching this scene, sighed a little bored, so he said that what he hates most is these etiquettes that you come and go. He turned his head and glanced at the various shaped buildings, corals and stone mounds in the distance. A strange color flashed in Zhang Yang's eyes, and he said to Bernie impatiently, "Bernie, I'll leave it to you, I'll go there and take a look first." Quote. After finishing speaking, Zhang Yang didn't wait for Bernie to answer, and when he stepped on it, he rose into the sky and shot towards the inland of Fishman Island. This scene immediately left the Fishman soldiers stunned. "Fly, fly away." The Fishman soldiers looked up at Zhang Yang, who turned into a black dot in the sky, and murmured with wide eyes. "Major Bernie, this is..." Hanny also looked at this scene in a daze. Bernie sighed helplessly and explained with a wry smile, "He is Major Zhang Yang who led us this time. Nothing will happen, I will do the registration." Chapter 96 Miss Shiarly. Fishman Island, as a dream island where fishmen and mermaids live, is absolutely a paradise in dreams for humans living on land. The fairy tale Beautiful Mermaid, and the cultural customs that are completely different from those on land, are all in the it attracts countless people to go there, and even on land, it has begun to be called Fishman Island, paradise in the sea. At this time, Zhang Yang was in this, undersea paradise. Buildings with completely different styling styles from those on the land, fishmen with different shapes and beautiful mermaids with bubble circles come and go in an endless stream, and shops with all kinds of exquisite and exotic goods are displayed one by one. This is a street somewhere on Fishman Island. Under the amazed and vigilant gazes of countless mermen and fishmen, Zhang Yang walked on the street as usual, his dark eyes looking at everything around him with interest. It is indeed an attractive dream island. Looking at the outrageously beautiful mermaid floating by, Zhang Yang's eyes flashed with surprise, and he couldn't help but nodded secretly. Beautiful mermaids, all kinds of fishmen with interesting looks, and completely different architectural styles and cultural customs from those on land. For people on land, this place can indeed be called an underwater paradise. For Zhang Yang, although I have seen it in the anime, but I saw it with my own eyes, I can't help but feel a sense of shock from the heart, especially those beautiful mermaids that can only be seen in fairy tales, even if they have seen mermaids. He couldn't help but take a few more glances. As for the vigilant look around him from time to time, although it was a little weird, Zhang Yang didn't care much. After all, Fishman Island has been mutilated by so many humans, so it's not surprising to see him with this kind of eyes. While walking around, Zhang Yang walked out of the street without knowing it, and just after Zhang Yang left, the mermaids and fishmen on the street suddenly started talking. "That was Marine just now, right?" Fishman, a male with a bulging belly, asked uncertainly as he looked at the direction in which Zhang Yang was leaving. Who else can be except Marine, who has never cared about Fishman Island, and even murdered our Marine with the pirates before, and I don't know what to do now. Another female Ankang, Fishman, snorted coldly. Now that Fishman Island is protected by the king's friend Whitebeard, even Marine shouldn't dare to do anything, right? A beautiful mermaid with long green hair said worriedly. Of course it is. Fishman and the mermaids discussed Marine's publicity is naturally unknown, because at this time, he was already attracted by the scene that can only be seen in fairy tales. This is a bay not far from walking out of the street. The bubble channels filled with water extend from the water to the sky. Surrounded by rocks and corals with strange shapes, it gives a very dreamy feeling, but it is very flamboyant. I can't focus on this, because the scene in the water is even more dreamy. The sweet and touching laughter, the splashing sound of the water, as well as the beautiful faces and the graceful body, plus the looming fins in the water. I think I understand why so many people like to catch mermaids and sell them. Looking at the beautiful mermaids in the bay playing with each other, Zhang Yang was stunned for a while, before he couldn't help but murmur with a sigh. The beauty of mermaids is not just talking about it, it seems that they are naturally prettier than most human beings, each with a beautiful face, coupled with the beautiful body, coupled with the fins, it can really give people a kind of strangeness. It's really not unreasonable that mermaids can get that sky-high price. At this time, the mermaids also seemed to have discovered Zhang Yang, and there was a flash of curiosity in their beautiful eyes, looking at Zhang Yang, and one of the mermaids with an orange ponytail even smiled at Zhang Yang. Zhao, little brother D, are you Marine? Why don't you come down and play together? Little brother D, why do you like to call it that? A strange look flashed in Zhang Yang's eyes, and a smile appeared on his face. He opened his mouth and was about to say something, but a somewhat surprised and coquettish cry suddenly came out from the mermaid. Big brother Marine, you are really here. Big brother Marine. Zhang Yang was stunned for a while, then looked at the place where the voice came from. A flash of surprise flashed in his eyes. A mermaid girl with a delicate face and short black hair was looking at him with a look of surprise. If he remembered correctly, this person, the fish maiden, appears to be one of the 3 mermaids rescued at the Sabayati archipelago. It's you, have you returned to your acquaintance? Zhang Yang said with a light smile. The mermaid girl seemed very happy, she nodded fiercely, and then said to a much mature black-haired mermaid beside her, Sister, it was this big brother who saved me. That's him. The black-haired mermaid looked at Zhang Yang in surprise, then reacted, and hurriedly took the mermaid girl to the shore, bowed to Zhang Yang gratefully. Thank you, Mr. Marine, without you, I really would not. I can only imagine what my sister will become, thank you so much. Quote. It's nothing, this is what Marine should do. Zhang Yang waved his hand and smiled. Hearing this, the other mermaids were stunned for a moment, and then a flash of brilliance flashed in their beautiful eyes, and they came around. Because in the subconscious of everyone on Fishman Island, human beings are all bad people, whether they are Marines or pirates, but now it seems that this little Marine is a little different from the rumored human beings. Hey, little brother Marine, are you strong? You must be strong if you can take back little Emma from the traffickers. I like strong men very much. Mr. Marine, let's come down and play together. Yes, come down and play together. The mermaids said to Zhang Yang in a coquettish voice. Zhang Yang felt dizzy, and even had the feeling of being surrounded by stars. A helpless smile appeared on the corners of his mouth. He was not Sanji, in this case he really can't handle it. It's really noisy. At this time, a somewhat cold voice came over, and the mermaids looked over immediately, and saw a mermaid girl appeared on the coast not far away. She has the same short black hair as the mermaid girl that Zhang Yang rescued. Her icy blue eyes are staring at Zhang Yang and the others. Pale skin, purple nails, wearing a purple-blue hoodie, with a delicate face, a very calm and indifferent look, sitting on a bubble, exuding a kind of atmosphere that strangers should not approach. Miss Xiarli. Seeing this mermaid girl, all the mermaids couldn't help but let out a coquettish cry, and then one of the mermaids said apologetically, I'm sorry, Miss Xiarli, I disturbed you, but we saved little Emma to welcome you. Mr. Marine, I'm so sorry. Marine. Hearing this, Vivi, the girl named Shirley, frowned and glanced at Zhang Yang. When she saw Zhang Yang's face, she couldn't help but change her face, and said in shock, "It's you." Huh. Zhang Yang was taken aback for a moment. Chapter 97 Shirley's Prophecy. Zhang Yang's Death. Huh. Zhang Yang was stunned for a moment, staring at the girl mermaid named Shirley with a look of surprise. Zhang Yang naturally knew about this mermaid called Miss Shirley. Although she is not called a lady but a lady now, and she looks much younger, there is no doubt that the person in front of her is the one who will be in Fish in the future. Man Island is known as Mrs. Shirley, the fortune teller with a 100% accuracy rate of prediction, and is also the sister of Arlong who was captured by him earlier. Zhang Yang recognized her identity the first time he saw Shirley, but when he saw Shirley as if he knew him, Zhang Yang couldn't help but feel a little surprised. A fortune teller who can't use common sense at all, fortune telling that he is not a person from this world. It's just, doesn't she need a crystal ball for divination? Zhang Yang was surprised, and the other mermaids also looked at Shirley in surprise, not understanding why Shirley showed such a look of knowing Zhang Yang. Sister Shirley, do you know Big Brother Marine? The little mermaid with short black hair asked Shirley curiously. Hearing the little mermaid's words, Shirley realized that he had lost his temper, adjusted his mood, regained his calm, glanced at Zhang Yang, and shook his head gently. I don't know. Hearing this, Zhang Yang was relieved. Those who are not of our race will have different hearts. If possible, Zhang Yang still thinks that he is a transmigrator. No one should know about it, unless one day his strength is strong enough to ignore anything. People. However, the next moment, Shirley's words lifted his heart again. However, I saw him in the prophecy crystal ball. Shirley stared at Zhang Yang closely. In the prophecy crystal. The mermaids looked at Shirley in surprise and exclaimed, they were very familiar with the prophecy crystal ball. In fact, not only them, but the entire Fishman Island knew its function. The tool Shirley used for prophecy, the content of prophecy would be, will appear on the crystal ball. It just made them curious. What did Miss Shirley predict for Zhang Yang? Zhang Yang couldn't help but look at Shirley, waiting for her to speak. Seeing Zhang Yang also looking at her, Shirley paused for a while, then slowly said, to be precise, I saw you when I was prophesying for my brother. In the prophecy, you caught my brother. Miss Shirley's brother. That Fishman pirate. The mermaids looked at Zhang Yang in surprise, and one of the mermaids couldn't help but exclaimed, is this Mr. Marine that powerful? I remember that Miss Shirley's brother was strong. The other mermaids were also discussing one by one, looking at Zhang Yang with surprises. Miss Shirley's predictions will never go wrong. That is to say, the Marine who doesn't seem to be very powerful in front of her is actually Miss Shirley's brother. To be a great man. The mermaids were surprised, but Zhang Yang was relieved, looked at Shirley who was staring at him, smiled and nodded and said, yes, a pirate named Arlong attacked us when we were about to arrive at Mermaid Island, but now that I have caught him, if he is your brother, do you want me to let him go? It's not necessary, I've reminded him, he brought it all on his own. Shirley shook his head calmly, then turned around and planned to leave without stopping. Seeing this, Zhang Yang hesitated for a moment. Shirley's ability is absolutely unbelievable. Zhang Yang is also very curious about his future. If he asks Shirley to predict his future, what will he see? Wait a minute, Miss Shirley. After hesitating for a while, Zhang Yang couldn't help shouting. Anything else? Shirley looked back at Zhang Yang. Hearing this, Zhang Yang calmed down and said with a chuckle, listening to what they said just now, you seem to be able to predict, and the accuracy rate is very high. Of course, Miss Shirley's prediction is 100% accurate, which is a fact recognized by the entire Fishman Island. A merman couldn't help but said, oh, 100% accuracy. Zhang Yang looked at Shirley with a very surprised look. So what? Shirley frowned, not understanding what Zhang Yang wanted to say. Seeing this, Zhang Yang took a few steps forward, stopped 2 meters away from Shirley, and said seriously, "To be honest, I'm also very curious about my future. Can you help me predict it?" "I refuse," Charlie said indifferently without any hesitation, then turned around and planned to leave. "Wait, I can let your brother go," Zhang Yang said quickly. "I said it, he asked for it, it's none of my business," Charlie said with the same expression. "It doesn't matter if he spends the rest of his life in endless pain." Zhang Yang raised his eyebrows. He still didn't believe it. Even if Charlie really didn't like Arlong, he could still be indifferent when he heard this. Sure enough, the result did not disappoint Zhang Yang. Hearing Zhang Yang's words, Charlie suddenly froze, turned around again and frowned at Zhang Yang and said, "What do you mean? Don't get me wrong, I didn't mean to threaten you." Zhang Yang waved his hand and said with a serious look, "To be honest, pirates caught like this are usually either locked in a cell or executed directly. Although Arlong will not be executed, it is certain that he will be locked in a cell. And most of the prison cells are villains among humans. With the current relationship between humans and Fishman, I think you can guess the result, right?" Quote. Hearing this, Charlie's calm eyes couldn't help but tremble. Indeed, if it was true as Zhang Yang said, then Arlong's fate might not be better than death. "Strictly speaking, your brother didn't do any harm to us. It's nothing to let him go. My condition is just to ask you to help me once. For you, it's just a small matter, isn't it?" Seeing the change in Charlie's expression, Zhang Yang immediately continued. Hearing Zhang Yang's words, Charlie was silent for a while, before he couldn't help sighing, looked at Zhang Yang and shook his head and said, "Sometimes, it's better not to know about this kind of prophecy." "No way, I'm just curious." Zhang Yang shrugged and smiled. Charlie glanced at Zhang Yang, did not speak, but directly took out a crystal ball the size of a basketball from his waist bag and held it in his hands. "My prophecy can only make a range, and I don't predict what I want to predict, so I don't know whether it will predict the future in you or something else," Charlie said calmly, and then closed his eyes without waiting for Zhang Yang to answer. Seeing this, the other mermaids also made bubbles out of bubble coral and floated over, watching this scene curiously. After all, there didn't seem to be many people on Fishman Island who had seen the people predicted by Charlie with their own eyes. Zhang Yang's eyes narrowed as well, and he spread out the observation hockey spiritual pressure. I wonder if he can perceive what the Charlie prophecy is going on. It's just obvious that Zhang Yang was thinking too beautifully, because until Charlie opened his eyes, Zhang Yang couldn't perceive anything, everything was normal. "Is it all right?" Silently withdrew the observation hockey reiki, Zhang Yang couldn't help but said. The mermaids also stared at Charlie curiously. Charlie didn't answer, her eyes were fixed on the crystal ball, and after a while, she sighed. "I've said it before, sometimes it's better not to know about the future." Saying that, Charlie turned the crystal ball over with the side facing her, and presented the picture shown above in front of Zhang Yang and the mermaids. It was a ruined place like a battlefield. The smoke of gunpowder rose slowly, the ground was shattered, and countless marine corpses were scattered everywhere, and in a huge ditch on the ground, a marine corpse it was directly split into two halves, and a lot of blood and internal organs flowed out. Ah! Looking at this bloody picture, the mermaids couldn't help but scream in fear, and quickly looked away. However, Zhang Yang couldn't help but shrink his pupils, because the corpse that was split in half. It was himself. Chapter 98, Princess Autoji. It is the eternal law of nature that people have birth, old age, sickness and death. Death, for anyone, whether facing it calmly or fearing it, is the last thing a person must experience in his life. Of course, after that, it represents the disappearance of this person. Of course, this is only relative to ordinary people. For Zhang Yang, who is the god of death, as long as his spiritual pressure is strong enough, his life can even be extended indefinitely. Therefore, Zhang Yang never thought about his own death. Pass. But now. How? Maybe. His eyes stared at the image on the crystal ball where he was cut off by the waist. Zhang Yang's pupils trembled violently, and he couldn't help muttering in shock. After all, the picture on the crystal ball was too much for him to believe. With Zhang Yang's current strength, it is rude to say that if he fights for his life, even if he is like Admiral, even if he can't defeat him 100%, but with the high-temperature flames, Zhang Yang has absolute confidence, even if he is himself if he can't defeat Admiral, he won't be in any danger. Even once he completely masters Shikai, who is wielding a blade of fire, Zhang Yang has absolute confidence that he can kill Admiral. And with such strength, he would be directly cut off by someone. Who the hell is he, who has such strength? Whitebeard, Kaido, Bigum, or Gorosei, 5 elders. Could it be that he died because of this trip to the New World? But why would they kill themselves? Zhang Yang's heart was fluctuating violently, his face was constantly changing, and the sudden, bad news, made his calm mood become a little uneasy. On the side, the frightened mermaids also discovered that something was wrong at this time. When they saw that the people on the crystal ball turned out to be Zhang Yang, they were all shocked. No, it's impossible, Miss Shirley, there must be something wrong, right? No, Big Brother Marine won't die, right sister? The black-haired little mermaid looked at her sister with a pale face. Emma, don't talk nonsense, Miss Shirley's prophecy is not wrong, although it is difficult to speak, but I am afraid that the benefactor who saved you will really be killed in the near future. The mermaid's sister also looked a little sadly. Zhang Yang's back said. Why is this? Hearing this, the little mermaid named Emma covered her mouth in disbelief, and tears couldn't help flowing down. The other mermaids also looked at Zhang Yang with regret, although they couldn't bear it, but it was clear that in their eyes, the future of Zhang Yang could only be killed as shown in the crystal ball. I said, sometimes it's better to not know the future, now you understand what I mean. At this time, Shirley looked at Zhang Yang with a constantly changing expression, and couldn't help sighing. Then the picture on the crystal ball disappeared, and the crystal ball was taken back into her bag. And when he heard Shirley's words, Zhang Yang also came back to his senses, glanced at Shirley. Zhang Yang tried to calm down his mind, and said in a somewhat solemn tone, your prediction is really 100% accurate. Did you miss it? Hearing this, Shirley was stunned for a while, then shook his head without speaking, turned and walked directly into the distance. This time, Zhang Yang didn't stop Shirley, but looked at Shirley's back, frowning fiercely. There is no doubt that Shirley's prophecy should not be wrong, even if the original prophecy that Luffy will destroy Fishman Island has not happened, but there is no doubt that after that, for whatever reason, Luffy destroys Fishman Island. This is definitely going to happen, and now that Shirley is prophesying his own death, there is no doubt that the picture on the crystal ball will definitely appear, and probably very recently. After all, the self on the crystal ball just now seems to be about the same age as the current self. Could it be that I'm really going to die? He murmured softly. Zhang Yang smiled bitterly, and then forgot about it. He is not the kind of person who is lost because of an uncertain future. If his future is really dead, it will be useless no matter how depressed he is. What should happen will still happen, and what should not happen will never happen. Thinking of this, Zhang Yang's mood suddenly improved, and the solemnity on his face began to gradually dissipate. Hey, Dai, I want to see what the future will be like. There was an inexplicable smile on his face. Zhang Yang turned around, but found that the mermaids were looking at him with a somewhat sad look, and the little black-haired mermaid who was saved by him was looking at him. Emma looked at him with tears in her eyes. After thinking for a while, Zhang Yang understood what was going on. It seemed that he had been regarded as a dying person by these mermaids. With a wry smile, Zhang Yang was not in the mood to stay here any longer. Excuse me, I'll go first. Nodding and smiling at the mermaids, Zhang Yang turned around and planned to leave. It's just here that he suddenly heard a faint high-pitched voice coming over. Zhang Yang's footsteps stopped, his brows frowned, and he tried to listen. Mother. Niang, where are you going? Ag Niang Niang, where are you going? Please stop. The voice was getting closer and clearer, and when he heard the content, Zhang Yang couldn't help but flash a hint of surprise in his eyes. Empress Yiji, Princess Yiji, Princess Shirahoshi's mother. It seems to be the voice of the Neptune army. Empress Otoji is coming this way. The mermaids also heard the voice, and several of them couldn't help but wonder. At this time, Zhang Yang's eyes suddenly narrowed, because not far away, a Meowman figure ran far away, chased by many fishman soldiers. Under the sunlight brought by the huge tree Eve, her appearance was imprinted in Zhang Yang's eyes. He has long wavy golden hair, blue eyes, orange hair accessories, and a long robe with a fish scale pattern. Vivi's delicate face flushed red with the violent running. Princess Otahime. Sure enough, it's her. Looking at Princess Otoji, who was running from a distance, she opened her mouth and muttered. Chapter 99. Visiting Dragon Palace City. Princess Otahime, the mermaid princess praised by thousands of people on Fishman Island, has a high level of observation haki, which can even directly listen to her heart. She has a lofty ideal of allowing Fishman Island to migrate to the ground and live on an equal footing with humans. If it is said that apart from Xiarli, who can predict the future on Fishman Island, the person who impresses Zhang Yang the most is this Princess Otoji. Therefore, Zhang Yang's eyes suddenly flashed with surprise when he saw this Princess Otoji running towards him under the pursuit of a large group of fishman soldiers. But soon, Zhang Yang was even more surprised. Major Zhang Yang. In the distance, a loud shout suddenly came out of Princess Yiji's mouth. Princess Yiji waved her hand and ran towards Zhang Yang with a smile on her face. Seeing this, Zhang Yang couldn't help but be stunned for a moment, and then couldn't help but flash a strange color in his eyes. How did he feel that after coming to Fishman Island, someone always knew him? First, he happened to meet the little mermaid Emma whom he had rescued, then Xiarli, who predicted that he would die soon, and now there is a Princess Otahime. How weird. Zhang Yang was secretly surprised, but he didn't know that Princess Yiji was even more surprised than him. The reason why she could recognize Zhang Yang had to start from an hour ago. An hour ago, she was teasing her 3 children with King Neptune in Ryugu Castle, but suddenly received a notice from the border guard that a marine's warship was approaching Fishman Island. At the moment of this news, both Neptune and Princess Otoji were stunned. After all, since Whitebeard put his flag on Fishman Island, not only has there been a lot less pirates doing evil things, but Marine, who occasionally comes to Fishman Island to catch merman, has never appeared in the past few years. However, now that they heard the sudden arrival of another warship, their surprise can be imagined, and after the surprise, they have different ideas. Led by Neptune, almost all the ministers believed that the defense of Fishman Island should be improved. Once Marine did something wrong, even if Marine was behind the world government, they would follow suit. However, Princess Otahime's thoughts are completely opposite to those of Neptune and others. She believes that Marine's arrival this time has absolutely no bad ideas. If there were, it should have started earlier, and she has been working hard. Princess Otahime, who wants to live peacefully with human beings, also believes that as long as she can have a good relationship with Marine and go deeper into the world government from Marine, one day, Fishman Island will be truly treated equally by human beings. The two ideas were completely different. Under the black lines in the eyes of the ministers, Princess Otahime and King Neptune even quarreled directly. After a lot of quarrel, in the end, the two decided to go and see this time. Who is Marine? So, the two came to the bay and saw the leader of the Marine this time, a major named Bernie. This time, Neptune was a little bit unconcerned. The major is just, he is the king of Fishman Island. For Neptune, it was really too small, and Princess Otoji couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. Major, for wanting to change the status quo of Mermaid Island, it is too weak. However, when this Major Bernie faintly revealed that the real leader of the warship was another major named Zhang Yang, and he had a lot of titles, not only Neptune, but Princess Otoji was also shocked. Youngest Major. Combat even on par with Vice Admiral. Never heard of Paramesha fantasy fruit abilities. Owner of Conqueror Hockey. One of the next 3 Admiral candidates. Marine headquarters, or even the most valued. Monster level, genius in the history of the world government. Wait. This series of titles immediately made King Neptune and Princess Otoji dumbfounded. In Marine, there are such monster characters. No, if these are not exaggerated words, I am afraid that it can no longer be described as a monster, right? Neptune and Princess Egoheim were shocked, but what followed was Neptune's worry and Princess Egoheim's excitement. In Neptune's view, a super genius like Zhang Yang, who is highly valued by Marine and even the world government, once something happens here, Mermaid Island may really be in crisis, and in the eyes of Princess E.G., if she can with Zhang Yang's support, the possibility of her ideal being realized has increased countless times. Concubine Otoji, who was thinking like this, ran out without hesitation when she asked Bernie about Zhang Yang's characteristics and direction of departure. Neptune, who saw this scene, naturally knew what Concubine Otto was thinking. But the issue of humans and Fishman Island can't be so reckless for Princess Otahime to do it, so out of prudence, some soldiers followed. So, this is what is happening now. Sure enough, he is so young. If Major Bernie hadn't exaggerated, then this person's future achievements would be terrifying, but completely ignoring the Fishman soldiers behind her, Princess Otoji ran towards Zhang Yang while launching observation haki to listen to Zhang Yang's inner voice, and then Lu Mei couldn't help Vivi wrinkle. Her habit is to listen to the other person's voice before contacting someone, because she feels that only by understanding a person's heart can she communicate better with a person, and she has always done this. Only this time, Princess Otoji found that this move was a little out of order, because she found that she couldn't hear Zhang Yang's inner voice at all, as if there was some special power resisting observation haki from entering Zhang Yang's heart. Sure enough, as Major Bernie said, this young Major Zhang Yang is really amazing. The first time this happened, Princess Yi couldn't help but sighed in her heart. It seems that this time, she can't take chances with Zhang Yang. Taking back the observation haki, Princess Itoji has come to Zhang Yang, and she took a few short breaths. With a reassuring smile on her face, Princess Itoji stretched out her white palm and smiled at Zhang Yang. Major Zhang Yang, I finally found you. It's nice to meet you. I'm Otahime, Queen of Fishman Island. Ah. Zhang Yang was stunned for a while, then subconsciously stretched out his hand and shook it, and then said strangely, Princess Yi, do you know me? No, it was Major Bernie who told me your information. They have already visited Ryugu Castle at the invitation of King Neptune. I have come to invite you. Princess Otoji smiled and shook her head and explained. It turns out that. Zhang Yang nodded. No wonder he said why he was so weird. So many people knew him. It was just a coincidence. Ag Niangyang, please slow down. The king told me to protect you well. At this time, those fishman soldiers also ran over, and one of the blue-skinned and robust whale shark fishman soldiers ran to the side of Princess Otoji, glanced at Zhang Yang and said dissatisfied with Princess Otoji. Humph. I'm not a child, I don't need protection. Princess Yi hummed indignantly, but then remembered that Zhang Yang was still here, and the dissatisfaction on her face quickly dissipated, as if nothing had happened just now. He smiled at Zhang Yang and said, Major Zhang Yang, please come to Dragon Palace City as a guest. Dragon Palace City is already preparing a dinner party. Well, then thank you for your hospitality. Zhang Yang chuckled lightly, but he was secretly complaining in his heart. The character of this Princess Agi is really interesting, and it is no wonder that in the original book, she runs around and even catches criminals with her own hands. This way, please. Princess Otoji made a gesture of invitation, then glared at the blue-skinned whale shark fishman soldier beside him, and signaled something. The whale shark fishman soldier shook his head helplessly, and then shouted to the other soldiers. All the soldiers salute and welcome Major Zhang Yang to Dragon Palace City. Yes. The soldiers saluted immediately, and then spread out neatly to both sides, leaving a passage. Seeing this, Zhang Yang was immediately a little ashamed. The saying that people are afraid of being famous and pigs are afraid of being strong is really good. He doesn't know about other people, but he is really not used to this kind of situation. Princess Yi, let's go together. Also, You don't need to make such a big battle, I like to keep a low profile. Zhang Yang shrugged. It's still necessary to have the proper etiquette, Princess Yiji said with a smile, and then left side by side with Zhang Yang. At the same time, she couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. It seems that this Major Zhang Yang is not the kind of person that is particularly difficult to get along with. Princess Otoji thought to herself. Aside, Zhang Yang glanced at the blue-skinned whale shark fishman soldier as if nothing had happened, and a strange color flashed in his eyes. Sisha Jinbei, I didn't expect to be a soldier in Dragon Palace at this time. If possible, I can dig him down. Looking at this future fishman powerhouse, Zhang Yang's mouth ticked invisibly, then returned to normal, and left here with Princess Otoji. And the mermaids by the bay, watching this scene, all fell into a sluggishness. Although Princess Otoji is usually friendly and pleasant, it was the first time they saw that Princess Otoji used such a big battle to pick up a person to visit Dragon Palace. Who is that Mr. Marine? Looking at the figures of Zhang Yang and Princess Yiji leaving from a distance, a mermaid couldn't help muttering. The black-haired little mermaid Emma, who was watching this scene, clenched her small fists and murmured confidently, Miss Charlie's prediction must have gone wrong. Big Brother Marine is so powerful, and even let Empress Yiji lead the way. With so many Neptune troops coming to greet them, they will definitely not die. Chapter 100. Do you have a daughter? Dragon Palace City. This is the sacred place in the hearts of all the people of the entire Fishman Island. It is the place where the king of Fishman Island lives. It seems to be in order to highlight the special status. Its location is just above the Fishman Island. Wrapped in a completely independent bubble, the only entrance is the bubble corridor controlled from within the Dragon Palace. It can be said that even ignoring its military strength, it is an absolute fortress with almost no possibility of breaking through its geographical location alone. As such a deep-sea city, its interior decoration is naturally unimaginable to ordinary people. Accompanied by Princess Otoji and the soldiers, Zhang Yang followed them on the special car, sent by Ryugu Castle, a deep-sea fish like a giant eel. Zhang Yang came to this Dragon Palace castle that he had seen in the anime. It's awesome. On the giant eel, in the air-filled bubble, Zhang Yang sat casually, with the flowing blade in his right hand propped up on the eel, looking at the Dragon Palace city immersed in the water in front of him. He couldn't help muttering to himself. In the bubble where the Dragon Palace city is located, it is almost completely filled with seawater. Under the sunlight brought by the huge sun tree Eve, corals of different colors, dazzling fish of all kinds, and in front of it are countless times more gorgeous than the palace. The huge castle makes people feel as if they are in a dream. To be honest, it is similar to the feeling when I saw Dragon Palace City in the anime before. Although it is much more shocking than in the anime, but when I see Dragon Palace City, subconsciously, Zhang Yang's mind will flash the place where the Dragon King lives in Journey to the West. Dragon Palace scene. The same underwater world, the same gorgeous and dazzling, people can't help but admire it. That's right, Fishman Island is so spectacular, and I don't know how spectacular the Thunder God's Island in the New World is. Zhang Yang couldn't help but look forward to it in his heart. On the side, watching the change in Zhang Yang's expression, Princess Yiji couldn't help but feel a little joy in her heart. Seeing that this Major Zhang Yang had a good first impression of Longgangcheng, she must seize this opportunity to let the people of Fishman Island really live in the sun. Princess Yiji clenched her fists, and then introduced Ryugangcheng to Zhang Yang with a smile on her face. After a while, everyone came to the hall of Dragon Palace City, a large space with exquisite and gorgeous decorations, like a real palace in ancient times. Among them, a large group of people are busy, carrying food, and performing shows. They look lively and invincible, and one of the huge fishman, Zhang Yang recognized the identity of the other party at a glance. Fishman Island, Lord of Dragon Palace, Neptune. Boo! With a light sound, the bubble film around Zhang Yang was peeled off, and the huge deep-sea eel put on a bubble ring at some point, and flew into the air-filled hall with Zhang Yang and others. Zhang Yang couldn't help but froze. This is a bubble that was opened for the convenience of you as humans. Princess Otahime explained. Zhang Yang nodded clearly, but then he couldn't help feeling a little strange. Although his status in Marine is now no less than Vice Admiral, but in the end, it is only in Marine. On the bright side, he is just a little major, and he is such a little major, but it seems that it is not normal for Princess Otoji to treat her so warmly, right? At this time, everyone in the hall also saw Zhang Yang and others. Neptune breathed a sigh of relief, and involuntarily looked at Zhang Yang. When he saw Zhang Yang's appearance, he couldn't help but flash a trace of shock in his eyes. Really so young? Neptune murmured. If the major named Bernie didn't exaggerate, I'm afraid Marine would really have an incredible character. With this in mind, Neptune gestured to the other ministers, and a group of people greeted them. However, there was another figure who went up together, that is, Major Bernie, who was walking with Zhang Yang this time. Seeing Zhang Yang, he immediately breathed a sigh of relief. He was really afraid that Zhang Yang would cause trouble on Fishman Island. Fishman Island is naturally far inferior to Marine and the world government in terms of strength, but the most terrible thing about Fishman is not its strength, but its ability to survive in water. This world is full of oceans. Once the bottom line of Fishman Island is really touched, it will really be a big crisis. The reason why pirates dare not continue to wreak havoc on Fishman Island is because of Whitebeard, but Marine is because of this reason. Next, Zhang Yang was naturally a helpless compliment. He couldn't understand why Neptune and the others were so polite to him, a major. After the compliments, it was the so-called banquet. A lot of food and wine came to the table from afar, and the mermaids danced in the bubbles filled with water, accompanied by the accompaniment of an unknown band, although Zhang Yang didn't like this kind of attraction. It's an eye-catching occasion, but I have to say that this banquet is really easy to make people feel happy. Putting Lu Ren Ruahuo aside, Zhang Yang took a sip from a bottle of fine wine called Hayden wine, and he couldn't help but drank a few more sips. Major Zhang Yang. At this moment, Bernie came over a little embarrassed. What's wrong? Zhang Yang said casually, pouted, looked at the Hayden wine in his hand and nodded. It's quite delicious. Do you want to take a few bottles with you? Actually, I revealed your identity to the King of Mermaid Island. Bernie pushed his glasses a little embarrassed, and then quickly explained. Actually, Mermaid Island has always been hostile to humans, even if Marine is no exception. In order to prevent something from happening, I think it's better to reveal some of your information. Huh? Hearing this, Zhang Yang was stunned for a moment, then waved his hand with a wry smile and said, forget it, it's fine, but now I finally understand why they are so polite to me. Shaking his head, Zhang Yang took another sip of Hayden wine and shook it at Bernie. It's pretty good, would you like some? No need for Major Zhang Yang, you can drink it, I'll just go have some dessert. Bernie waved his hand quickly and walked aside to eat dessert. In this way, the banquet continued for more than 3 hours before it ended. After the banquet, Zhang Yang and Bernie were invited to come here in a very comfortable living room. The two sofas are facing each other, with a tea table in the middle. Bernie and Zhang Yang are sitting together, and Princess Otoji and Neptune are sitting together. Major Zhang Yang, Major Bernie, are you satisfied with this banquet? Neptune's huge body looked down at Zhang Yang and Bernie and smiled. King Neptune is serious, I am really grateful for such hospitality. Bernie nodded and smiled. If this is not satisfactory, then we are deliberately looking for trouble. Zhang Yang also smiled, then paused, as if thinking of something, turned his head to Princess Yiji and said, by the way, Princess Yiji, do you have a daughter?